Here it's just green light when it's on. On. On.
Is it okay with you if we start? The Committee on Education and Workforce will come to order. I note a quorum is present with a lot of friendly conversation going on. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call a recess at any time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for a hearing entitled Competencies over Degrees, Transitioning to a Skills-Based Economy. I thank the witnesses for traveling from as far as California to testify on such an important issue. Our economy is rapidly changing, and there's an urgent need to match the competencies of our future workforce with in-demand jobs. Advancements in technology, industries, and the global markets are reshaping the opportunities available in America's economy. Many employers are feeling the effects of America's economic growing pains as they struggle to access the skilled workforce needed to match the times. There's a growing recognition that the old ways of identifying talent are not working for today's economy. To address this issue, job creators across the country are shifting to skills-based hiring to broaden the talent pipeline and fill in-demand, good-paying jobs. It is time we reassess the definition of success in our society. Despite nearly 2/3 of Americans aged 25 and older not possessing a bachelor's degree, we have perpetuated the notion that such degrees are the only pathway to the middle class. It is essential that we acknowledge the immense potential within individuals that transcends any demographic boundaries. We need to speak honestly about the educational paths we offer and give priority to skills acquisition, whether through work experience, military service, community college, certificate programs, or online learning. At its core, skills-based hiring is based on a simple premise: all learning should count. If a worker has the skills and competencies to do the job, it should not matter how or where they obtain those skills. They should have the opportunity to compete for the job. By allowing all learning to be considered on a level playing field, we can unlock the potential of the millions of Americans who've gained skills through alternate routes. After all, supporting the multiple educational pathways that Americans are choosing will make a difference only if employers are willing to look beyond the bachelor's degree and recognize talent wherever it exists. The good news is skills-based hiring is gaining momentum as a solution to our workforce challenges. Increasing numbers of employers are removing degree requirements and instead focusing on specific skills and competencies needed for the job. This approach not only widens the talent pipeline, but is also proven to be more effective in hiring and retaining a high-performing workforce. President Trump led the way in reforming federal hiring through executive action, emphasizing skills over degrees. Several states, including Colorado, Maryland, Utah, Pennsylvania, Alaska, North Carolina, New Jersey, South Dakota, Ohio, and Virginia, have also eliminated degree requirements for most state government jobs. Employers are taking charge by creating their own pathways to identify and recruit skilled workers, including internships, apprenticeships, boot camps, and on-the-job learning opportunities. These initiatives equip candidates with the exact skills required to excel in their roles. However, for our workforce system to align with the demands of a skills-based economy, it needs significant updates. One challenge faced by employers is navigating the landscape of skill-based credentials. With an increasing number of programs and opportunities emerging, consistent and transparent information about credentials and the competencies they indicate is vital. Information on credentials should be funded and accessed easily through the workforce system. In turn, employers would have a greater ability to gauge the skills a worker possesses and determine his or her ability to succeed on the job. The workforce system can also play a crucial role by providing support in reworking job descriptions around the competencies and utilizing competency-based assessments to verify the skills of job seekers. In order to help more employers, particularly small businesses, build their own pathways for workers to develop critical skills, the system must place a greater emphasis on employer-led initiatives. Additionally, we must acknowledge that directly addressing the skills of prospective workers can be more difficult for employers from a legal and regulatory perspective than simply relying on a bachelor's degree as a proxy for ability, despite the fact that degree requirements automatically exclude the vast majority of Americans. Greater clarity and technical assistance on the lawful use of assessments would help more job creators make the shift to skills-based hiring. In conclusion, our economy is undergoing significant changes, and it is imperative that we adapt. I look forward to facilitating that shift in a bipartisan effort with my colleagues by reauthorizing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. With key reforms to WIOA, we can begin to bridge the skills gap in our nation's workforce. Let us seize the opportunities presented by a skills-based economy where individual potential and competency are celebrated above all. With that, I look forward to the discussion today and yield to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. And thanks to the leadership of President Biden and congressional Democrats, our economy is thriving. In the span of 29 months, President Biden has created more jobs than any previous president has created in a single 48-month term. In the past 2 years, respectively, are the first and second largest job growth years in American history. And that all happened while the president was improving the deficit situation that he inherited. As a result, we're not meeting today to discuss how to revive an economy. We're discussing strategies to continue to build on the economy from the ground up and the middle out, addressing long-standing challenges in the labor market and help find workers meaningful careers. For example, employers are continuing to look for skilled workers to fill the record number of new jobs. Over the years, far too many employers have fallen into the habit of requiring college degrees for jobs that do not necessarily require them. This approach dismisses qualified job applicants who are skilled and able to work, but are not even eligible because they do not hold a college degree. Both employers and our economy are losing out on the roughly 2/3 of talented working-age Americans who do not hold a 4-year degree. Moreover, requiring a college education contributes to economic disparities for people who are disproportionately facing barriers to completing higher education. Employers are increasingly evaluating job applicants based on experience and skills assessments rather than formal credentials or degrees. Major companies across industries, from Google to IBM in the tech sector to Costco and Publix in the retail sector, have been adopting skill-based hiring. Similarly, the federal and state governments, and you mentioned many states, are looking to this approach for an increasing number of job applicants. For the past 2 years, 10 states with both Democratic and Republican governors have passed policies to implement skill-based hiring for new public service jobs. Notably, the previous administration also issued an executive order that instructed the federal government to implement skills-based hiring, and the current administration released new guidelines on skill-based hiring within the federal government. These initiatives demonstrate that skill-based hiring has the potential to provide workers with another established pathway to find good-paying jobs. I'm encouraged by the bipartisan enthusiasm for skill-based hiring, and I appreciate the chairwoman's interest in exploring how programs in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, or WIOA, can do a better job of ensuring equitable employment opportunities for those with barriers to employment. When the House passed the legislation to reauthorize WIOA with bipartisan support last Congress, we included provisions that support those from historically disadvantaged backgrounds, such as an increasing use of wraparound services and codifying comprehensive services for justice-involved individuals. I'm also hopeful that this committee can discuss how the government can facilitate skill-based hiring practices without driving a wedge between the value of a college degree and skills and experience. A college degree remains the surest pathway to economic mobility. This does not mean that everyone should be forced to go to college, nor does it mean that everyone should be restricted to receiving skills training. Both higher education and skills training should be accessible to every American. In other words, Democrats agree that skill-based hiring has the potential to make our economy more efficient, more equitable, and more productive. But we must do more, but we must do our due diligence to ensure that new hiring practices close income gaps and expand pathways to employment. And to do that, we need a robust body of evidence that considers the employment outcomes of these individuals. Simply put, we must ensure that skill-based hiring is not just equitable in concept, but equitable in practice. To that end, I hope we can pass a bipartisan and fully funded reauthorization of WIOA that relies on evidence-based practices and better engages employers in our workforce development system. We should also pass 2 initiatives that remove financial barriers to upskilling. One, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2023. That's because registered apprenticeship programs rely on skill-based hiring and are alternative ways to economic prosperity, and Workforce Pell, which would enable students to use Pell Grants to access short-term programs proven to lead to good careers. Today, I look forward to discussing how these steps would unlock the full potential of our economy, rebuild the middle class, provide employers with the skilled workers they're looking for, and create more options for workers to find meaningful careers. So thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being with us this morning, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m., 14 days after the date of this hearing, which is July 6, 2023. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I now turn to the introduction of our distinguished witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Karen Kimbrough, who's the chief economist for LinkedIn, located in Sunnyvale, California. Our second witness is Dr. Mark Smith, who's director of HR Thought Leadership for the Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM. Our third witness is Dr. Papia Dubrow, who is Senior Vice President of Insights for Opportunity at Work. And our final witness is Dr. Dan Healy, who's head of People for Customer Success for SAP, which is located in Newton Square, Pennsylvania. We certainly have some interesting titles today. We thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. I'll remind the witnesses we've read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, I ask that you limit your oral presentations to a 5-minute summary of your written statements. I also remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the committee. I now recognize Dr. Kimbrough for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott.
Your mic, yeah. Well, we're working with temporary mics here, so we need you to pull them close so people can...
Okay, it is on, but I'll bring it closer. It is on. All right. Thank you. Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Dr. Karen Kimbrough, and I serve as the chief economist at LinkedIn. My team has been researching how we as a nation can do better to match talent to jobs, to enhance outcomes for individuals and employers alike. I appreciate the opportunity to share LinkedIn's insights on a skills-first approach to hiring talent. In the US today, there are 10.1 million unfilled jobs. On LinkedIn alone, the number of open jobs has doubled in the past 3 years. And at the same time, there are nearly 70 million workers that aren't being considered because they lack a college degree. These include Americans like Sierra, who had worked to acquire new skills over the past few years and is now seeking a better paying job as an IT manager. However, she finds she's consistently shut out, not because of lack of skills, but a lack of a degree and a system that too often overlooks other means of recognizing talent. Sierra and our more than 200 million US members interact with millions of employers seeking new and exciting job opportunities. And this gives us at LinkedIn a real-time view of our economy and how companies find and hire talent. It also shows us that our current system of hiring is simply not working. It leaves far too many people behind. The Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates that there are nearly 1.6 unfilled positions for every unemployed person in the US, highlighting a large imbalance between labor demand and supply. And when employers hire based on degrees, they miss out on half the workforce. In particular, this locks out roughly 3/4 of rural Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Black Americans who don't currently hold a 4-year degree. Our nation and our economy cannot afford such a system to continue. This trend has major implications for growth, inequality, and inflation. It's also unlikely to change dramatically in the foreseeable future, given early retirements and an aging workforce. We recently released a comprehensive report which highlights how a skills-first approach to hiring can address this gap by vastly expanding the pool of qualified talent and democratizing access to jobs. Our research found that in the US, the impact of shifting to a skills-first approach increases the number of qualified, eligible workers by nearly 20 times. With a skills-first approach in jobs where women are particularly underrepresented, such as technology or construction, the proportion of women in the U.S. talent pool would increase 26% more than it would for men. And we also found that younger workers are in the best position to benefit. In the U.S., the talent pool increases more than 18 times for millennials and more than 21 times for Gen Z workers. This approach, incidentally, also serves employers who can be more adaptive in meeting their changing labor needs, which will only accelerate with the continued advances of technology. We are already seeing evidence of this skills-first approach taking hold at many levels. Most significantly, our data indicate that roughly 1 in 5 job postings on LinkedIn no longer require a degree. Today, almost half of hirers on LinkedIn use skills data to filter candidates for jobs. And in the last year, LinkedIn members have added 380 million skills to their profiles. But let me be clear, we recognize the value of a college degree. It is a meaningful signal of competency and skills. However, we need to create multiple pathways to signal relevant talent and skills. And we believe there are several ways that Congress can help advance a skills-first approach. As part of the reauthorization of WIOA, we recommend a few things. First, encourage employers, states, and local governments who receive WIOA funds to use skills-first hiring. Allow funds to support employers seeking to implement skills-based hiring. Leverage the required skill assessments to enable credentials reflecting current skills, and allow support of research, evaluation, and dissemination of skills-first hiring efforts. In addition, we support Pell Grants being used for short-term programs, and we urge you to consider other recommendations included in our report. Thank you for the opportunity to share our insights, our thoughts, and our recommendations. LinkedIn looks forward to working with this committee as you pursue policies which promote a skills-first agenda for Sierra and the 70 million Americans.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kimbrough. Dr. Smith, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and honorable members of the committee. I'm Mark Smith, Director of HR Thought Leadership at SHRM, and I'm happy to testify before you today about skills-based hiring. On behalf of the 325,000 members of SHRM, thank you for this opportunity to be a witness on this important issue, particularly on the use of skills assessments. Skills-based hiring is about ensuring people have a chance to showcase their actual qualifications for the job. Unbiased and validated skills assessment measure the critical knowledge and skills needed for a job, and simply put, they open doors to opportunity. SHRM research has found that more than half of employers use pre-employment assessments, and 78% of those say it improves the quality of hires. These assessments connect employers to applicants who have been historically underrepresented, including those who didn't attend top-tier schools, people who served in the military or were incarcerated, workers with disabilities, youth who did not attend college, and older workers. The use of skills assessment requires careful management, and SHRM has identified best practices to consider when utilizing these assessments, including conducting a self-assessment to determine whether current employment practices disadvantage certain groups, creating objective job-related qualification standards, and implementing practices that diversify the pool of candidates. And while there are several strategies for determining the job-relatedness of a selection procedure, I will highlight 2 that are most relevant for skills testing. First, determining validity through content-related evidence involves demonstrating that the test content matches what employees need to do on the job. This involves a careful analysis to understand what's required to perform the job, followed by creating or adopting a test that reliably measures these skills. Second, a criterion-related validation consists of administering the test to a group of people, usually job incumbents, and then evaluating them on the job. To the extent that people who score higher on the test perform better on the job, the test demonstrates its validity. And there are several tools and approaches available to make the validation process easier. For example, the federal government has created a foundation with the Department of Labor-supported ONET system, which saves time and effort for organizations by providing valuable skill information for nearly 1,000 occupations. There are also existing tests available to employers for screening applicants on a variety of skills and skill levels, but employers must consider that these tests require some form of local validation. And some employers turn to credentialing organizations for verifying the skills of applicants by hiring individuals who already have the relevant credentials. Despite the benefits of skills assessments, many employers are not taking advantage of them. Some believe that skills tests are not worth the required effort, while others find the process too complex. And still others fear lawsuits or penalties from the EEOC or other agencies. As this committee pursues the reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, there are several ways in which this law may be used to elevate skills-based hiring. This includes expanding the range of business services made available to employers through local one-stop career centers to include assistance with implementing a skills-based hiring system using unbiased and validated skills assessments. WIOA should also be amended to expand the transparency of credentials and ensure that participants enrolling in an eligible program have a clear understanding that such a credential validates their job-relevant skills. In addition to changes to WIOA, SHRM supports the Advancing Skills-Based Hiring Act introduced by Representative Stefanik last Congress. This would provide employers with confirmation from the EEOC when their use of a specific assessment meets the burden of being job-related. Enacting this legislation will give employers the assurance they need to implement a skills-based hiring system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I now recognize Dr. DeBroy for 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to be here with all of you today. It's an honor to speak with you all. My name is Papia DeBroy, and I'm a researcher with the nonprofit social enterprise Opportunity at Work. I'm going to begin my remarks today actually by anchoring us in our labor force. There are about 140 million of us who are showing up to work every day, active. Of that 140 million, about 60 million of us have a bachelor's degree or a higher level of educational attainment. These workers have traversed a pathway through higher education that is critical to our economy. In addition to these 60 million workers, though, are another 70 million. They have a high school diploma, do not have a bachelor's degree, but are skilled. They're skilled through alternative routes. That acronym is STARS. So who are these workers that we call stars? Well, they're our cousins, they're our neighbors, our siblings, our parents. They've gained skills through military service, through community college programs. Most of the time, they've gained skills by showing up to work every day, getting better at their jobs, and gaining skills on the job. We know the world is different for stars than workers with a bachelor's degree. When a star entered the workforce in 1989 at the age of 25, they were earning less than a worker with a bachelor's degree. That has historically been the case. But if you track the star for the next 30 years of their career, what you see is that 30 years into their career, a star is still not earning what the bachelor's degreed worker was earning on day one of work. That inequality is new to this generation. Stars make up a significant portion of our workforce in every region of this country. In Virginia, stars are 48% of the workforce. In North Carolina, they comprise 54% of the workforce. In both states, they contribute to the economy in jobs ranging from sales representatives to software developers to registered nurses. When a job requires a degree, employers automatically screen out almost 80% of Hispanic workers, more than 70% of Black workers, 75% of rural workers, and nearly 70% of veterans. While bachelor's degree programs have been and always will be a critical pathway to higher wages in this country, tens of millions of stars are also gaining valuable skills for higher wage jobs. and they should not be locked out of opportunity. Especially because if you study the skills of stars, what you'll see is that millions of them are positioned for higher wages today. 30 million stars have skills to make a transition to a higher wage job if they were given access and opportunity to do so today. They're positioned for jobs we call gateway and destination jobs. Unfortunately, these are precisely the jobs they have been locked out of. They've lost access to almost 7.5 million gateway and destination job opportunities in the past 2 decades. These jobs include jobs like secretaries, HR assistants, computer support specialists, medical diagnostic technicians. These degree barriers are compounded by other barriers, misperceptions, biases, weaker professional networks. They amount to something we call the paper ceiling, and more than half of our workforce faces it. So what might we do to actually tear the paper ceiling? First, as an employer, the public sector plays a critical role. Federal, state, and local government actors are some of the largest employers in every state in this country. Yet, the government is requiring degrees for its roles more often than the private sector, and state and local government require degrees more often than federal positions. I do want to note how quickly the public sector has acted upon realizing this error. 14 states, as of this week, have removed degree requirements for state roles in the past 12 months. Second, we need a 21st century federal workforce data infrastructure. All labor market participants need trustworthy, granular, timely, and accurate data on occupations, vacancies, unemployment, wages, and skill needs. We need that data longitudinally and across geographies. Third, we must strengthen WIOA. WIO is the primary funding source offering STARS access to skills training and supportive service programs. Through it, we must elevate community colleges and the key players they are in local economies. The majority of STARS have some college credit, and nearly 1 of every 5 STARS has an associate's degree. And finally, employers must be incentivized to shift to skills-based hiring. Policymakers can actually support employers as they experiment with new ways to do this. For example, employers are deploying apprenticeships and other work-based learning programs in many new roles in the U.S. labor market. It's time to tear the paper ceiling for STARS. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. DeBroy. And now I recognize Mr. Healy for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and honorable members of this committee. My name is Dan Healy, and I'm the head of HR, or People, for the Customer Success Organization at SAP. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this hearing and to provide a perspective of a major technology employer and human capital management provider on skills-based hiring, an issue of critical importance to our nation. As the world's largest enterprise cloud software company, SAP and our 107,000 global employees and 25,000 colleagues here in the United States help over 450,000 companies of all sizes and all industries run at their best. This footprint enables SAP to touch almost all corners of our U.S. economy. Technology is changing rapidly, and with over 10 million open jobs and business needs evolving, companies have had to rethink their approach to hiring, developing, and retaining talent to focus on skills. This approach meets urgent business needs while expanding the opportunity for more workers to enter into in-demand career pathways. SAP has invested heavily and transformed our recruiting process, our approach to employee upskilling and career pathways, and also invested in digital skills in communities nationwide. Skills-based hiring is not just a trend. It is a business imperative. It allows us to tap into expanded pools of quality candidates, reduce time to hire, create opportunities for individuals who are often overlooked. At SAP, we've shifted away from looking at those traditional signals, such as degrees and universities attended, and instead we look at each candidate and look at how we can find ways to distill what that person can accomplish. We recognize that individuals can develop the skills needed to work in technology through many education pathways, including community colleges, career technical schools, software boot camps, technical certification programs, high school technical programs, on-the-job apprenticeships, internships, and our own U.S. military. Once workers join SAP, we continue to use a skills-based approach and develop to advance our talent. For example, in our labs, our software labs in the United States, we run rotational development programs that uses blind screening processes to assess talent for relevant skills. As a result, we've hired a more diverse class than we have ever had, with over 50% females and the largest number of underrepresented minority developers from boot camps and career backgrounds that were often overlooked. At SAP, we commit towards our employers' ongoing success. And part of that recipe for this is, again, skills-based development. For example, our salespeople and software developers receive skills assessments annually and personalized coaching. Regardless of their background, we can correlate skill development to on-the-job performance and company achievement. At SAP, we believe in building skills not only for our employees, but for communities nationwide. In 2021, we launched learning.sap.com, a free platform to build SAP-relevant skills. Last year, we had more than 1 million people actively engage with SAP's learning content, which offers some of the world's deepest and most robust IT education. In 2022, we further committed to upskill 2 million people by 2025 through our digital initiative. Here we focused on reaching out to communities previously excluded from some of these programs, specifically women, underrepresented minorities, veterans, unemployed and underemployed, along with students. We have programs for students including K-12 STEM education, university career development, and adult learners, and especially our NS2 Serves program, which supports our nation's veterans, which is a skills-based and hiring program that has led to a 98% placement rate among our veteran graduates. SAP is not alone in taking these actions to build skills in workers. For example, through the Business Roundtable corporate initiative, CEOs are collaborating to implement skills-based hiring and advancement practices, develop and scale apprenticeship programs, and advance other initiatives focused on workforce development, such as second chance hiring. To compete at home and globally, we need a public workforce development system that is flexible and capable of preparing workers with skills for in-demand and growing careers. Bridging the nation's jobs and skills mismatch will require a major national commitment to lifelong learning and a robust suite of services to deliver state-of-the-art continual skills. So thank you for this opportunity to share SAP's own workforce perspective. It's an area ripe for bipartisan action, with measurable opportunities to grow the economy and expand our talent pipeline. I know I speak for many across the business community in saying, I hope this committee and Congress will act on these opportunities. We're committed to partnering with you to meet employers' workforce needs and deliver opportunity for Americans to strengthen our global competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. Under Committee Rule 9, we'll now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. The ranking member and I will go first on asking questions, and then we're going to disappear, but we're not disappearing. We're going over to the floor because they don't schedule the floor around our committee, unfortunately. So we both have to go to the floor to handle a bill. So I want the witnesses to understand we're not just leaving willy-nilly. Thank you very much. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Healy, you made a very strong business case for skills-based hiring. Despite all the clear upsides you mentioned, it appears most employers are still relying on traditional criteria like bachelor's degrees and previous job titles. What do you think prevents employers from making the shift to skill-based hiring, and what is the most important thing we can do as policymakers to break down these barriers?
Chairwoman Fox, thank you for your question. Because skills-based hiring requires different processes and different thinking, there's a change management issue, I believe, at heart. Organizations have long struggled with skills management due to outdated skills frameworks and the difficulty to objectively assess skills and validate those skills. Skills-based hiring requires more time. It requires more planning. Often, the way headcount is deployed based on budget process, it's a land grab, and you fill open headcount quickly, which puts lots of pressure on talent attraction organizations and HR teams to onboard. So we have seen some great examples in my home state of Pennsylvania. For example, we've removed the 4-year degree requirement. I believe that policymakers can support by creating multiple pathways for improving transparency in data systems, in creating flexibility for workers, and ensuring data privacy also to acquire new skills. We also see the Pell Grants to pursue new skills and creating industry opportunities as well.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kimbrough, in your testimony, you discussed how certain skills overlap across occupations and industries. In the case of a worker seeking a degree change or a worker displaced by economic disruption, how can better identification of their existing skills and awareness of occupations with similar skills accelerate their advancement in the workforce?
Thank you, Dr. Fox. We think it's really time to rethink how we hire and grow talent. At LinkedIn, we see talent everywhere, but we don't see access to opportunity everywhere. When we think about a skills-first approach, what we see, and I say this as an economist looking at our data, it benefits workers, it benefits businesses and employers, it benefits the economy. Some of the main conclusions which I referenced earlier were the 20% increase in the potential talent pool in the US just by taking this approach alone. But what I didn't mention as well was the fact that democratizing access to opportunity benefits in particular people without a college degree, but also women and frankly all generations. And we see that it provides an increased resilience for workers who are navigating uncertainty and economic shocks when they are relying on their skills as opposed to trying to find a similar job title. And we also see that the data, our own data, actually suggests that when workers add skills, and the more skills that they do add, the quicker they find a role and the fewer jobs they need to apply to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Smith, I'm concerned that small and mid-sized employers may look at all the requirements for creating a valid skills-based assessment. I think it's too complex to pursue. Can you briefly walk us through how an employer can, quote, transport, unquote, the validity of an off-the-shelf assessment developed by a third party? And do you think additional clarity and technical assistance from the EEOC on transporting validity would be valuable to employers seeking to switch to a skills-based approach to hiring?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Fox. Happy to talk about validity transportability. The basic premise there is if you have a job in one organization where you've validated a test, in order to transport that validity to a different location, you have to demonstrate that the job in the new location is functionally the same job. There are a couple of different ways to do that. One of the ways is through a job analysis questionnaire where you can match the duties and requirements of the job that has validity evidence to this new job. But there isn't a lot of good specific guidance, and I think that's what we in the hiring community would need: good specific evidence on what it takes to demonstrate proper validity for transportability.
Thank you very much. Yield back the balance of my time and recognize the ranking member for the purpose of questioning the witnesses.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith, just following up on that, I think the question and the answers reflect the idea that some tests may not be effective in evaluating potential applicants and also may show bias without showing any relationship to the ability to do the job. Who would actually validate how do you validate the test, and how do you avoid inadvertent bias?
Thank you for the question, Representative Scott. As long as the test is job relevant, that equals valid. And so you need to go through the process to show job relevance. And
well, you can show job relevance with a discriminatory impact.
Well, right. And so, first of all, the tests need to be standard and used in a standard way. So everybody is treated the same. The test is scored the same way. Some of the times, even when you go through that, the test does show differential outcomes for different groups. That doesn't necessarily mean that the test is biased. As long as the test is job relevant and everybody's treated the same way, then the disparate impact that may occur.
Okay, there have been tests in the past that have shown job relevance valid, but better workers do better on the test, poor workers do worse, with a notorious racial bias. Dr. DuBois, can you speak about how you deal with the racial bias in some of these standardized tests?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Scott. When we approach hiring with pedigree-based screening mechanisms, we automatically screen out a huge portion of workers in the United States. So almost 80% of Hispanic workers are screened out, 75% of Black workers are screened out. We also screen out veterans, we screen out rural workers in disproportionate volumes. When we approach the skills-based hiring method, there are a lot of different mechanisms that employers have available to them to actually think about how to assess the skill of a candidate. The first recommendation we make is actually to consider the skills that the worker is gaining on the job in their past job, because that's actually how most of us make transitions in the US labor force. We make transitions to jobs that require very similar skill. And so the deployment of methods then to actually evaluate the skill of the candidate will vary a lot across different occupations in the US labor market. Picking the right skills assessment to actually ensure that you are not being biased is a really critically important point.
But you'll acknowledge that some tests may be good in terms of general validation, but have a significant racial bias.
Yes, that's correct. There's a lot of variation in the types of assessments that employers use, and some of them are not neutral. That's correct.
Thank you. Dr. Kimbrough, well, in Lincoln, a lot of people look at the resume. Can you say a word about how a resume would look much better if it had a registered apprenticeship? Registered apprenticeships have national recognition, high standards, and how would that help somebody's resume?
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. When people are able to, on LinkedIn, members essentially upload their resume, and we call it their profile, it's data they choose to share publicly. They can put not only prior experience, what they've done, where they've worked, which would include apprenticeships, but also skills that they've gained in the process of doing any particular job. So the benefit, to answer your question, of having an apprenticeship would allow a member on LinkedIn or any worker or job seeker to have more exposure to skills, to have more opportunity to showcase and demonstrate those skills on their profile, and therefore be perhaps a stronger match for a wider range of roles.
Let me get in another question. You also have skills certificates that you can get at a community college. How would a short-term Pell help you get those certificates on your resume?
Thank you for that question. I should say we're supportive of short-term Pell programs in general, and you've asked the question, how would they help someone get a secure role? To the extent that any member can enhance their education and skills by attending a community college, that is clearly another one of those powerful channels for accessing opportunity, for enhancing someone's human potential, and so we would be very supportive of that. The more skills that a member has, as I said before, the more opportunities they have to be recognized by recruiters and hirers and actually secure a job faster. And I will say that we find that people who are sub-baccalaureate actually benefit disproportionately more by adding skills to their profile.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
They've given us a few more minutes. Do you want to stay or do you want to go? I now recognize Mr. Thompson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. As the co-chair of the Congressional Career and Technical Education Caucus, this hearing is timely given the challenges employers currently face in finding skilled workers in nearly every industry and every sector across the country. CTE schools often educate students with these skills in mind at a low cost and, quite frankly, in a short period of time. Now, I'm glad we're finally recognizing as a society the value of careers and education outside of traditional four-year universities. As I travel throughout my district, I'm incredibly pleased to see many career and technical education schools that now have waiting lists because of increased interest and demand. These investments in our future will help the next generation climb the ladder of opportunity. I always like to say it's not so important where you start in life, it's where you end up. and having to be able to reach that next rung in the ladder of opportunity is what we work hard to provide. Mr. Healy, as you noted in your testimony at a company as large as SAP, you implement a wide variety of hiring practices to recruit and retain a talented workforce. Now, while I'm sure that some jobs at your company may require a bachelor's or advanced degree, you noted how many do not. And even though a prospective employee may not have all the necessary skills for the job on day one, that doesn't mean that the employer cannot fill in the gaps. So, Mr. Healy, how do you think we can place a greater emphasis on employer-driven upskilling, such as apprenticeships or other work-based learning?
Congressman, thank you for your question. Employers will provide and serve an important role in helping newly onboarded candidates develop ongoing learning and skills to succeed in their job, to also be prepared for jobs that don't quite exist in the, or haven't been budgeted yet in a company. So companies like SAP place a great emphasis on learning, on skills development, along with rotation programs, internship programs. But collectively, we believe in on-the-job learning, which is every talent has an opportunity to learn about 70% of what they need to be successful and for career growth on the job. Another 20% is in mentoring and coaching and ongoing support. And finally, the 10% part is in the actual hardcore skills learning. So it's a combination, but it's certainly fostered on the job.
Well, similarly, your testimony touched on the idea that skills-based hiring means that companies should consider a job applicant's current skills in addition to a candidate's ability to acquire new skills for the future. What are some of the ways employers can gauge an individual's potential to build relevant skills?
Thank you for the question. I think that, as was referenced earlier, certainly standardized and objective measures to assess a candidate's skills, the applicability of those skills for roles within, for example, SAP, will allow more employers like SAP, and this is something that we're trying to do consistently, to make more informed and better decisions. But it does come down to that standardization and objective measurement of the skills that are in demand for roles. So that removes, again, the focus away from the degree and perhaps the institution where they studied to the actual skills.
Very good. Along those lines, graduates from CTE schools are often well equipped with the technical skills and knowledge that employers are looking for. And I've been proud to see so many partnerships between the private sector and these schools in recent years. In many instances, local employers are coming to CTE schools with a set of skills or knowledge that they need to fill vacant positions, and these schools have been able to collaborate with them on a curriculum that meets these needs. Do you think that there are ways companies like SAP can partner more closely with CTE schools so they are involved in the students' education and can ensure that their skills meet the needs of today and, quite frankly, tomorrow's workforce?
Congressman, yes, I do agree, and I believe that there's a massive opportunity for companies like SAP to partner with institutions like this. Just as an example, now this is our University Alliance program, but we're extending that approach. For 25 years, SAP has worked with universities, community colleges around this country, where we engage between 125,000 and 150,000 students to learn very specific SAP skills that can apply to not only our customers, we have 197,000 customers in the United States, but also our partner community and certainly SAP alone. And these programs incorporated into coursework, CT programs, et cetera, provide very relevant, timely skills, which will stand out, by the way, on a LinkedIn profile, which will stand out when we're running skills-based searches in LinkedIn to identify candidates. So I think that there's more of an opportunity to move that focus and engagement from the university level to other schools as well.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. My time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize for 5 minutes, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. As has been said earlier, the topic of this hearing could not be more timely. The labor market continues to outperform all of the predictions of economic experts on both the right and the left. On June 2nd, when the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics report came out, the economy, again, defied all the predictions, created 339,000 new jobs. At the same time, as Dr. Kimbrough said, the number of job openings increased. So, trying to sort of solve this problem for both employers but also for prospective workers is all about trying to change the metrics in terms of how a person connects to a job opportunity. In southern New England, we are seeing this phenomenon, on steroids. Right now with Electric Boat Shipyard, who is doing, again, a huge increase of work for the Navy in terms of submarine production. Last year, they hired just under 4,000 people in Rhode Island and Connecticut, and the hiring target for this year is 5,750. So, when you are dealing with an issue of that magnitude, skills-based hiring, just by, sheer volume, is driving change in terms of how people are approaching. The good news is that WIOA pre-apprenticeship training programs really have just shown at this moment in terms of setting up accelerated programs for welding, electricians, metal trades in general, that over a period of 8 to 10 weeks, you can actually get in the door of the shipyard and then go from there on a daisy chain up to a full apprenticeship training, and then even to advanced degrees, because there's a lot of work for engineers, both in cyber and design work, that's happening right now. The biggest issue that we're hearing from our workforce board in terms of how we can fix this, and again, a lot of the reforms that you have discussed here today, I think would be a really good help for rewriting WIOA. But trying to get people, particularly from communities that really haven't traditionally sort of been part of this sector, to sort of take the leap in terms of moving forward, is dealing with just basic issues of how do you afford to take care of your kids, get transportation, pay the rent during that time period. And there's a limit to just how much the stipends under WIOA can really afford to make it feasible for people to move that. So obviously Pell Grants, short-term Pell Grants would help the cause, but last year's WIOA actually addressed this issue by just sort of recognizing these realities in terms of trying to help people really transform their lives. And again, Dr. Kimbrough, maybe you could comment in terms of just how that can really help solve this skills gap problem.
Yeah, thank you so much, Congressman. Absolutely. We have seen in our own data, which spans over 200 million members in the U.S., the impact of the shocks to the labor market, both from the pandemic and then the recovery, which was on its own sense kind of a positive shock. And as a result, we see that it's really important for workers to have all their needs met in order to be able to explore careers, because careers are not prescribed anymore. They're very opaque. It's not a ladder where you go one step, next step. You acquire skills, and then you look around to see where could this skill possibly be applied, where can I maximize my income. So absolutely, it is important and imperative that we find ways to expand all the pathways for people to access skills and then be able to demonstrate them, have them validated, so they can have career progression and receive really better wages. And
so again, that's why we have to really focus on sort of just basic, realities for people in terms of trying to make that change. It's not that easy, as much as we know it works. So another example of earn while you learn is apprenticeships, which goes back to the 1930s, the Fitzgerald Act. Congressman Fitzgerald had my congressional seat at the time when President Roosevelt signed that into law. We know it works. But unfortunately, it has been too narrow a segment of the population that's been served by it. Our reauthorization that got through the House last year actually would extend the scope to other sectors like healthcare that have not traditionally been apprenticeship. And again, Dr. Breuer, in a few seconds, maybe you could just sort of talk about how that model, which again allows people to deal with how you pay the bills, can really change people's lives.
Absolutely. Apprenticeships, as you say, they're a time-tested way for actually offering employers a very reliable pipeline to skilled talent. And while they have traditionally been concentrated in the trades, we did some work last year that actually showed that in the last 10 years, apprenticeships have expanded to 100 new roles in our labor market. And employers have actually been implementing informal apprenticeships in an additional 200 roles. So they are absolutely a method that employers should be thinking about considering in more scale in the coming years. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Now recognize for 5 minutes, Mr. Wahlberg.
I thank the chairman, and thank my friend from Connecticut, too, for highlighting that, because it is expanding, because it works, and we need to keep doing that. Thanks for the panel for being here. Dr. Kimbrough, you've seen, I'm sure as I have, over and over again, the shortage of skilled workers, with employers just crying out for needed workforce. Could you explain more fully LinkedIn's finding that shifting to a skills-first approach would increase the number of qualified eligible workers by nearly 20 times, and I'm sure you have illustrations from the small business community on that.
I do. Thank you so much, Congressman Wahlberg. And let me just say that we do indeed hear from many, many employers who are looking for talent across a range of industries, from healthcare to construction, even manufacturing and retail. So it really is happening at this moment. Our findings that we could potentially expand the talent pool of qualified eligible workers by up to 20 times in the US is calibrated on the idea that if you look at just the skills that people have and you don't try to first filter for a degree, you start off already with a much broader pool of people. So if I start with a constraint of just a degree, I'm already restricting myself to only 37% of working Americans. And then I need to find the skills that I want. Yeah. But if I do away with that constraint, I'm starting with a much larger pool. And that's how we get, in very quick terms, how we get to a 20 times number. But it ranges from industry to industry. Some industries don't see as much of that expansion, but all industries do see some expansion of talent pool when we use a skills-first approach. And on the small business point, absolutely we have about 80% of our employers are small businesses on our platform. So they are definitely adopters of this approach.
Yeah. Well, that's my approach to fishing. I look for the largest schools and go for that. Dr. Kimbrough, you discussed also how LinkedIn found that matching job seeker skills to job postings specifically led to higher success rates and required fewer applications. The workforce system under WIOA is tasked with getting employed and underemployed workers into job opportunities. Can you explain LinkedIn's approach to matching skills with opportunities, and are there ways the workforce system could better utilize skills information to achieve that mission?
Yes. At LinkedIn, we have a platform that essentially enables job seekers to come and find employment. They can look privately, or they can signal that they're open to work. And we have employers who are seeking talent. And what we find in our data is that, as I said before, there's an increasing need to find talent, and a lot of industries are still struggling. I will add that we're starting to see job seekers come back with a little bit more interest in the past couple of months, so maybe the labor market is rebalancing. But what we see in our data is better matching. When we use a skills-first approach, you get a more precise match, a better match. And what that means, I'll put my economist hat on, is that we just have a more efficient market. It's more dynamic, it's more efficient, because people are moving around and navigating their career choices according to the skills they have, and not because they need to find a job with a similar job title. So it's kind of a win-win, and I do believe, lastly, as I said before, that it does provide a lot more access opportunity for many more underserved groups: rural Americans, veterans, women.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's what we want to see. Everybody participating. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dr. Smith, you indicated that 79% of HR professionals find scores on pre-employment skills assessments just as important or more important than traditional criteria like degrees or years of experience. How can directly assessing the skills of candidates through assessments lead to more effective hiring and relying on a bachelor's degree or proxy for ability?
Thank you for the question, Representative Wahlberg. I think it's time that we stop making the assumption that the only place to get key skills and abilities are through colleges and getting college degrees.
Parents, are you listening? Go on.
There are skills assessments to more directly assess these things, and I think that organizations should use them more and worry more about the skills and less about where they came from.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I think it's going to be proven. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize 5 minutes, Dr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us this morning. In North Carolina, Governor Cooper recently issued an executive order emphasizing the importance of skills-based hiring. In turn, this would encourage more North Carolinians to apply for government jobs and to help recruit additional skilled workers without having attained a four-year degree. In your testimony, Dr. DuBrois, you identified 13 state governments that have removed degree requirements for their jobs classifications. As you correctly pointed out, these actions send the message to other employers in the state that if a worker has the skills to perform a job, they should have access to it and the potential career advancement that it offers. So would you elaborate just a bit more on how state governments are currently benefiting from the adoption of skills-based hiring practices?
Thank you so much for the question. You're exactly right. In the last year, as of this week, 14 states have removed unnecessary degree requirements for hard-to-fill roles. 10 governors followed Maryland's lead last summer in passing executive orders, and 4 states have passed legislation focused on skills-based hiring. This is a bipartisan movement, and it speaks to the critical need, as you say, to rethink our standard hiring practices in a labor market that is not allowing many workers to reach their full potential. These actions are really low-cost ways to actually open hiring processes to more applicants and improve economic mobility in regions for qualified workers. In the example of Maryland, where we worked closely with the governor, they were motivated to address the needs of the workers, and what they actually were able to do by shifting their hiring practices in this state alone was enable access to 1.3 million additional workers.
So let me ask you, because I've got a few more questions. Were there any barriers that you could mention that you've seen?
Barriers to removing degree requirements? Yeah, good question. So in the context of the public sector, I think one of the things that's actually been proven now by these 14 states is that when the decision is made, action can follow quite quickly. And I think that's actually a really important signal for all of us to be latching onto at this moment.
Okay. So, Dr. Kimbrough, you mentioned briefly in your testimony that non-degree holders lose a vital path for upward mobility when employers use degrees as a proxy for skills. So can you talk a little bit about how skill-based learning impacts the ability of workers without degrees to earn promotions? And do you think that this practice, whatever it may be, would minimize any possible biases when promoting workers?
So thank you for the question, Congresswoman. So we believe that talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not, and skills are everywhere. Everyone possesses a variety of skills, a constellation of skills that allow them to perform tasks and hold jobs. To the extent that workers are able to embrace learning, and we see this on our own platform with more and more people choosing to invest in themselves through online learning courses or through taking classes at community college and adding those skills to their profile. We see we think of it almost like skills are a currency or a building block for your career, and the ability to acquire the skills is what will allow people to kind of enrich and empower themselves. So I absolutely think that this is how people can progress in their career, by having greater experiences, a bigger breadth of experiences, and fundamentally expanding the avenues for learning.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you. So in the LinkedIn report, it's mentioned that traditional skills such as years of experience, are flawed predictors of somebody's ability. So can you discuss briefly how to prepare workers who are already in the workforce for a skill-based hiring?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat just the last part of the question?
For workers who are already in the workforce, how should they be prepared for skill-based hiring?
So for workers who are, very briefly, for workers who are already in the workforce, preparing for skill-based hiring really means being able to acquire skills, showcase your skills, demonstrate them in a way that can be valid, and remember that all skills matter. So many skills are changing over time. It's imperative for people to kind of continuously learn.
Well, thank you very much. As a 40-year college professor at a 4-year institution, I certainly appreciate all that you've offered today. Thanks very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize for 5 minutes, Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, first of all, for Ms. Kimbrough, you said something that is during your testimony that bothered me a little bit. You advocated more use of Pell Grants. And my concern with Pell Grants is always there's a significant marriage penalty associated with them and a significant work requirement because they're based on percent of poverty. So, I can think of 3 examples since I've had this job, people giving me examples where people didn't get married because they got, quote, free college. Of course, a Pell Grant isn't entirely free, but, it helps you along those lines. Could you comment on that? Because that's my big problem with Pell Grants. How do you respond to people who'd say they expect the person who's grabbing the Pell Grant when they have a full-time job or grabbing the Pell Grant when they're married? In both those cases, they don't get it because they're not in poverty, and that therefore the Pell Grants discourage work and discourage marriage.
Thank you for that question, Chairman. Congressman. At LinkedIn, we support broadening the pathways for people to have access to opportunity. So to the extent that a Pell Grant is yet another option, it's in a variety of options. We don't support, or we haven't taken a position on any particular piece of legislation. We're just very supportive of the opportunity to work with this committee to find numerous solutions for all Americans.
No, you understand what I'm saying, though, right? A Pell Grant is based on percent of poverty. So if you're, say, going to school in addition to working full-time, you can't get the Pell Grant. If you marry somebody who has a full-time job, you can't get the Pell Grant. There are people who don't have jobs or don't get married because they're eligible for these sort of programs. Does that bother you?
Apologies. So I have not investigated this issue very deeply. It's a little outside of my domain as a macroeconomist, but I would say it would seem prudent to have as many options as possible so that we don't let people kind of fall outside in corner solutions. Okay.
Next question for Mr. Healy. I think due to court cases which are now 50 years old, it makes it difficult to give people some tests that maybe you can take, maybe even in lieu of a college degree. How do you think we can deal with that? Because on the one hand, we want to be able to hire people based on skills or ability to do something. On the other hand, we have court cases kind of saying that you can't give certain tests. Can you explain to me how we can kind of square that circle?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I'd like to illustrate an example and an investment that SAP has made. I hope it directly answers your question. Years ago, SAP created our NS2 Serves program. It is a program designed to support our veterans. There are 19 million living Americans who are veterans. And to address a growing need, now this is very specific around the skills piece that I want to touch on. SAP launched NS2, and it's a subsidiary of our company, but the program is in high demand, and we essentially offer free training in supporting veterans in their transition to civilian life. It's an 8 to 12 week intensive program. and students at all technical levels, and I think this is, I hope, addressing to your question, at all technical levels, get world-class software training and education and learning.
No, you're not answering my question. Okay. So I gotta maybe clarify it more.
Okay.
If you are going to give somebody to a job, and you are not going to say you have to go to college, you have to find another way to measure this applicant versus another applicant. There was a time in this country where you could do that by giving them a test. Okay, court decisions struck down the idea of just giving somebody a test. On the other hand, I think we have all sorts of people who could do a job without going to college, but they can't get that job. So how does the company identify that person? And the obvious way to do it is to give them a test.
Brief question.
Okay.
Brief answer, man.
Very shortly, I would say it's, again, back to the skills assessment piece. What are the required skills for a role, independent of their credentials? And what are the skills which we can assess of candidates? And we can match those skills.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Ms. Macbeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and to our witnesses for making this hearing possible today. Sorry. A college degree or credential is still the surest path to economic security, but it's clear that relying so heavily just on higher education system that remains pay to play is not what's best for our students or for our country. For too long, it's been emphasized that the only way to be successful is to possibly take out a loan and go to a four-year institution. While we have some amazing universities in our country and in my state of Georgia, they remain and that they truly do kind of remain the surest path for Americans to create a good life for themselves and for their families. There are other options out there that we need to be doing more to promote as well. Every student in high school should have the chance to be encouraged to learn more about the trades and other opportunities to get ahead, like registered apprenticeships. I'm highly in favor of those. While I firmly believe that every student should be able to go to college if they want to, the fact of the matter is that some families are just not able to afford to send their children to college because of the cost, a direct result of decreased public investment in higher education. And I can say that having had millions of dollars taken out of our public school institutions and universities in Georgia. There are over 122,000 adults in my district alone, Georgia 7th, that qualify for some form of student debt forgiveness under the President's plan. And I believe that this number would not be nearly as high if we did more in Congress, my colleagues and I, to lower the cost of college, while also making sure that students are made aware of and able to consistently follow other opportunities that are out there in order for them to become successful. Programs offered by IBEW Local 613 at the Atlanta JATC Electrical Training Center in my district provides students with the opportunity to do a lot of on-the-job training, learning, and getting paid a good wage at the same time. First year inside wiremen and construction electrician apprentices get paid about $14 or $15 an hour, and they can expect to earn over $34 an hour after graduating from this program. And we should be doing more to expand these opportunities by reauthorizing the National Apprenticeship Act and taking real steps to ensure that every American knows that these are viable paths of success for them. Dr. DeBroy, I have two questions for you today. Most registered apprenticeship programs utilize a skills-based assessment when onboarding an apprentice with some competency-based training as a means of education. In your testimony, which I've read, you mentioned that nearly 40% of the workers entering new registered apprenticeship programs are going into high-wage jobs that historically require a bachelor's degree, and that's an incredible statistic. Would you agree that registered apprenticeships are considered a skills-based hiring approach?
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, absolutely. Apprenticeships are a critical lever available to employers to bring skills-based to bring a skills-based approach to their hiring.
Thank you. And how can employers utilize registered apprenticeship programs when adopting skills-based hiring practices? And if you would really expound upon that, because I'm a huge proponent of what we're talking about today. I have a district in Georgia that is a lot of first and second generation immigrants. A large number of my constituents were born outside of the United States. So this is really important for my constituents so that they too are able to really be able to be economically successful.
Absolutely. Apprenticeships are really a time-tested way of offering employers a reliable pipeline of talent that is skilled. And to your point, we've seen in the data since 2010 that registered apprenticeships have expanded in terms of what types of jobs they're preparing workers for. We've seen them expand to 100 new roles in the US labor market. And further, we see that they're actually implementing informal apprenticeships as well to an additional 200 roles on top of that. I think what's also important to understand in the data is that by opening up these new roles to apprenticeship opportunities, they're actually attracting a much more diverse workforce as well. We're seeing increased opportunity for workers of color as well as women into a number of these positions that have historically not been available to workers who haven't gone to college. These positions include jobs in healthcare, in tech, in advanced manufacturing, and other sectors as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Allen.
This thing on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being with us today. This is good. This is some good information that we need to pass on to the entire country. I had the privilege to grow up on a small farm, as most young Georgians did prior to 1970. I learned many skills growing up on that farm, like operating equipment, masonry, concrete welding, and carpentry. And I did that starting at a very young age. I was able to pay my way through college by working as a welder in a large fabricating plant. And of course, I attended a very fine architecture and engineering college. But my first ownership opportunity in the construction industry was with a second-generation general contractor founded by my mentor for many, many years, who had a sixth-grade education and was one of the most successful, is an icon in the community, very successful business person. But he, like most young people who grew up in the Great Depression, he had to go to work and help support his family. Dr. Smith, as employers in Georgia and across the country are struggling to find workers, it's time to acknowledge that a college degree is not always a good measure for what a worker can bring to the table. In fact, I will add this, majority of my, in the construction business, my subcontractors grew up through the trades. And they became entrepreneurs and formed their own businesses, and they employ hundreds of people. And of course, you know, that they were able to learn quickly what, you know, their passion. And we need to support employers who want to find qualified job candidates through skills-based hiring. In fact, nearly two-thirds of Americans aged 25 and older do not possess a bachelor's degree, yet society has perpetrated this idea that a college degree is the only pathway to the middle class and a good-paying job. Can you explain how the use of pre-employment skills assessments can help employers remove degree barriers and give all workers a fair chance to compete in the respect they deserve?
Thank you for the question, Representative Allen. So yeah, I think for every job, there are a set of skills that somebody needs. And they can get those skills from multiple different places. You can get them from colleges, you can get them from vocational schools. There are some skills you can get from watching videos on YouTube. And as long as they have the right skills for the job and they can, pass a reasonable assessment of them, I think that makes them a good candidate, and they should at least be considered for the job regardless of educational background.
In your testimony, you said 78% of HR professionals believe the quality of their hires has improved due to use of pre-employment skills assessments. However, you also mentioned that many employers are not taking advantage of them, one reason being a fear of lawsuits or penalties from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Would you like to expand on that? Should EEOC provide more technical assistance to employers to help them shift to skills-based hiring through the use of assessments?
Yes, we would like the EEOC to provide some assistance on the front end, so organizations are vetted, get the thumbs up from the EEOC if they've done the validation of their test properly.
And employers would be interested in receiving this help?
Yes, and the employers that we've talked to, they would be interested in receiving this help, and I think it would help many organizations get over the fear of using the pre-employment assessments.
Mr. Healy, last Congress, I joined my colleagues Elise Stefanik, Michelle Steele, Julia Letlow in introducing the Validate Prior Learning to Accelerate Employment Act, and this legislation is to accelerate job seekers. Do you agree that this would be a good update to the law?
Congressman, I do agree. I think any opportunity, again, where we can focus objectively on skills and remove barriers, create standards around that, so that companies can match demand with existing talent that's out there. And we know, and my fellow experts here have confirmed that there's an inordinate number of amazing talents out there that are seeking opportunities. So I do agree.
Thank you. I'm out of time, but I do have additional questions about WIOA and some of the things they need to be doing to assess skills, and I'll submit those in writing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Ms. Hayes.
Thank you. We actually agree on this topic, that there is more than one way to be successful. I think Democrats have been saying that all along. We think that we need to have multiple pathways for opportunity and that there are multiple avenues for success. I would be the first to say that. I was a high school teacher for 15 years, actually National Teacher of the Year, and I know that college is not for everyone. So there is no dividing line here. Democrats support the idea of apprenticeships, of workforce training opportunities, and we have been completely on board with this issue from the very beginning. But I welcome this conversation today. It's very important to encourage students to pursue whatever pathway will present the most amount of success for them, whether it be higher education or workforce opportunities, and expose them to those opportunities and the realities of the job market. The trades and skilled labor offer careers to students directly out of high school, as well as the opportunity to learn as you go through apprenticeship programs, which would be lifesavers for many of the students that once sat in front of me. In Connecticut, 4,400 advanced manufacturing companies employ more than 161,000 workers. My district is home to 1/5 of that workforce, so I'm definitely supportive of these initiatives. More and more out-of-state companies are also moving to Connecticut because of the existing workforce in the aerospace and defense industries and the potential to grow. This spring, 2 manufacturers in the housing sector announced new facilities in Connecticut, citing the talent pool available in the state. Additionally, this year, Connecticut introduced the state's first manufacturing strategic plan with the vision of increasing manufacturing employment to 235,000 by 2033. Last Congress, the House passed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which would have reauthorized federal programs to support workforce development efforts and transition to skills-based hiring. Unfortunately, the Senate did not take up our legislation, but we will continue to work on this, and I think we all agree. I also think that these programs have to be accompanied with both funding and transparency to make sure that we are doing them correctly. Dr. DeBroy, Through Opportunity at Work, we have helped businesses implement skills-based hiring in their employment processes. You've acknowledged that removing formal education requirements is a first step to facilitating hiring through skills obtained through alternate routes. In your experience, what is the most common obstacle employers face when trying to adopt skills-based learning, and what can the federal government do to remove those barriers?
Thank you so much for your question and for your remarks. There's a number of ways that we could think about actually supporting businesses to do this work, because it is a different method than what many of them are accustomed to. I actually want to start by talking about our small and medium-sized businesses. They employ 60% of stars today. In fact, 43% of stars are actually employed by a business with fewer than 100 employees. For many of them, shifting these methods is actually quite difficult. Through WIOA, we actually have an opportunity to increase services to businesses that could support them in making these shifts within their own organizations.
Thank you. Dr. Kimbrough, you mentioned the utilization of a LinkedIn skills assessment. Could you elaborate further on what skills are being assessed through those evaluations and how they may be used for different occupations?
Yes, thank you for the question, Congresswoman Hayes. We have at LinkedIn the ability for members to put up to 50 skills on their profile, and they can then we encourage them to take skill assessments of some of the top skills that they rank on their profile. If they so choose, they can post the results of that skill assessment. Now, the benefit of the skill assessment is that we are actually in an economy where, frankly, skills are changing. I can look back 5 years and see what the skills were required for a certain occupation and see what they're required now based on job postings or based on what people who are in that job actually say that they can do. And it's changing. Digital skills are evolving. And so as a result, what we see is that it's critical to kind of continually acquire these skills because we don't know what the future roles will be.
Thank you. And one of the things I used to say to my students is, tell me what you're good at and we'll figure out the job that's best for you. So I welcome this conversation and I encourage anything we can do to make sure that my kids have jobs of the future. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. And I recognize for 5 minutes, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Smith, in July of 2020, President Trump issued an executive order overhauling the federal government's hiring practices to prioritize skills over college degrees. From a private sector perspective, can you describe what was meaningful about that executive order? Maybe talk about some of the lessons learned?
Thank you for the question, Representative Banks. I don't know that I can speak to the specific results of the change in the legislation from President Trump. We have seen a shift over time from less organizations demanding college degrees. I don't know that I have a good answer for the real outcome of that.
From your perspective, did it appear to make a difference? If it was July of 2020, I suppose that there wasn't that much time that it was in effect, although it appears that the Biden administration has kept the executive order in place from my perspective. I don't know if the rest of you would agree with that, but it appears that was a pivot point and a change that one thing that this administration kept into effect from the last. Is that anybody else?
If I may, I would just add ancillary point that we are indeed seeing an increasing number of roles on our platform that do not require a college degree, and it was roughly 8% of roles did not require a college degree before the pandemic. And now it's about 20%. So it is increasing.
Anybody else?
I would offer an insight as a technology employer. Skills-based hiring, and of course, removing those requirements that you've mentioned. I think ultimately it just allows and ensures more talents to apply for prospective roles and enter the workforce, and that's very important. This means that we, of course, can grow talents, employees, colleagues when they join SAP. We also look at it not simply for identifying talents that we wouldn't necessarily look for, but also career growth opportunities, because the talent and the skills are universal. So the question is, what are the skills that are necessary to bring someone into an organization like SAP, number one? And then number two, what are the skills that are necessary to take future jobs that may not exist? So it's skills about, transferable skills, I would say, and also this learning mindset and curiosity, which in and of itself is an important skill set.
I mean, the reason I ask, is because oftentimes the private sector follows public sector and decisions like these, and this appears to be a very significant change from the last administration. This administration has kept in effect that that the private sector is following. I think that's what you're describing, you're agreeing with. Dr. Kimbrough, does LinkedIn have a public sector division within the company that talks about hiring practices and?
Thank you. Congressman Banks, I know that we have employees at LinkedIn that are focused on the public sector, but I would have to get back to you to give you an accurate answer.
And I didn't expect that you might be able to answer this question, but any idea does the administration have any dialogue at all, this administration, former administrations, with LinkedIn on practices and strategies where you have an avenue to give them feedback?
So I think I would have to follow up with you on that, or have our team follow up with you on that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's all I have. Very important conversation. We appreciate all of you being here today. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Ms. Manning. Mr. Wilson? Okay, Mr. Wilson? Norcross. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Norcross, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman, and I have to agree with my colleagues. This is probably one of the most cooperative conversation we've had in here, and I'm really glad to see it, because I think we all can understand that the idea of having a job, a career, is extremely important to the people for literally their life. But one of the narratives that you've talked about today, and quite frankly we hear, is in order to make it in America, you have to go to a 4-year school. That's great. Certainly I want to make sure my doctor, medical doctor, has gone there, but the idea of getting ready for employment and only going to college leaves out what you've talked about, so many people. I myself went to the other 4-year school. I did an apprenticeship. So I speak from a little bit of history here, and the reason being is that, quite frankly, parents are the first line of trying to encourage their kids to pursue a career or a job. And what I've heard so often is, the idea of a child who isn't pursuing college, they go to a vocational school because they couldn't do it, they're not quite as smart. That narrative is out there, and quite frankly, parents have to give their children permission to pursue an area of their career that they want to go. Always striving to do better, but the idea of doing better is only through college, I think, is something that I'm continuing to hear here. So that permission to pursue a career that works for the individual, that he can take care of his family, is extremely important. And this is why skills. You've hit the nail on the head. And this is where I want to ask a couple of questions. You brought up transferable. We used to call it portability. But skills is just a word. What particular skills we're talking about, and whether it's a registered apprenticeship, and registered equals an assessment that there are standards. If you have an unregistered program, that's great. But the difference between those two is when you're trying to describe, you get your first job and it's an apprenticeship program, but if it follows no standard, what does that mean to your next employer if they don't know what it is? And this is the questions I want to pursue, is whether it's an apprenticeship or skills, how do we set those standards? So, Dr. Kimbrough, if you could touch base on that, and how do you fit that into your assessments?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Congressman Norcross. What I would say is we have right now at LinkedIn a roughly 40,000 skills, a sort of a taxonomy of skills. And so we can see over time how skills are changing, as I mentioned before, which is quite interesting. But we also think about skills in different categories. So there are soft skills that, to use your word, portability or transferability, that go with you through your whole life as you develop them and refine them. So think of communication, management, leadership. These are all skills that are highly sought after in job descriptions. And then there are, of course, business skills, a Microsoft Word or a PowerPoint kind of skill. And then there are the digital skills, which are evolving relatively quickly, depending on the coding or if you're an online marketing expert. So we see different buckets of skills, and to answer your question, I would say all of these different buckets are evolving at different paces, but all of them are extremely important to seeing anyone survive, or I should say succeed, in their career.
Yeah. And I guess that's one of the challenges is once we describe what the skill set is, did you really do it? Because people like to embellish, and that's always going to be an issue, especially if you're an employer. You're assuming, rightfully or wrong, that what you're telling us is truthful. How do we go through that? Because if you graduate a registered program, there is a certificate.
Yes, and I understand your question now. Well, there are a couple of ways on LinkedIn that people can sort of, I would say, verify or validate their skills. One is through endorsements, which has long been a feature on the platform, which allows someone who's like your first connection, who truly knows you, to say, I worked with this person, I observed them for 7 years performing this skill. And generally, because your reputation's on the line, you're going to be truthful about the accuracy of their proficiency. The other way is there are skill assessments on LinkedIn. So those do exist, and people can take them, and there's a range of skill assessments, not for all 40,000 skills, but there is a range of them.
No, but the idea of heading this way, the other side of the coin is the employer when they're looking for it. So we have been trained that if you're college, it's better than a skill set. The term bias is not where I'm going, but an inclination that you want to hire somebody who has a 4-year degree versus somebody who has outstanding skills. How do we address that? I mean, you've talked about it in a couple different ways, but how do we get employers to say it's what job you can do well, not necessarily what piece of paper you carry with you?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Norcross. I think it's a very important one, and I'll illustrate one example that we've used in our labs out in California. We have labs in Pennsylvania, in the Midwest as well. We implemented a blind screening process focused specifically on the skills. Of course, the knowledge skill requirements of the role, but also the skills of the candidates. And in parallel with a rotation development.
I'm sorry, I'd love to follow up with you offline here. My time is is ending, so thank you for indulging me.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Burleson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. DeBroy, I wanted to kind of go in a different direction. I think it's clear that employers, and it's good to see that employers are rethinking the way they hire people and that they're rethinking the value of college degrees. My question is there any research done to evaluate the impact, the economic impact on individuals when states pass occupational licensing laws that then require a college degree? You know, for example, in Missouri, we had to fight for years to get African hair braiding separated from the cosmetology license. Ironically, the students were being forced to pay a lot of money and go to school for 18 months or more to get a degree that didn't even teach them how to braid hair. And yet the state was requiring that. And there are numerous examples across the country. So I'll stop ranting and just kind of ask that question. What is the impact of all these occupational licensing laws that require some education that may not be important?
Thank you so much for the question. On the occupational licensing landscape, that is outside the domain of my expertise. I will say, though, that there are a range of different credentials in the United States. There's more than 1 million of them, in fact, and the impact that they have in signaling to employers that a worker has skills varies so much. And so I think one of the important pieces of the conversation that is getting picked up right now is how do we actually measure skill as opposed to a credential? And a lot of the conversation today, I would say, is focused on how do we think about the skills of an individual and matching the skills of an individual to the skills required of the job.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. We have, as the policy of the United States, of the federal government and at the state level, is to subsidize universities, which I think has created the dynamic that we have today, where we have too few people that have in the trades and skills based, and we have a lot of people with philosophy degrees, myself included, right? But we got to this point because we funded it, we subsidized the universities, and then we do it directly, and then we fund the scholarships, and we fund the grants and the loans and everything like that, right? And then we create laws that say, if you want to be, an interior designer and pick the color of the paint on the wall, you better go to college. Well, at the end of the day, it causes economic harm to consumers, because now I got to pay just for somebody to help me pick color palettes. I got to pay for their college degree. So I think things are moving in an interesting direction. Coming from the IT sector, there was a lot of value that companies like Cerner, Oracle that I worked for, that they saw in paying for on-demand training, online training. Things like Pluralsight became available. Tools like LinkedIn Learning was an option as an employee. And it opens up employees to a vast opportunity to not only learn how to do their job, but learn how to do the job they want to transition to. And with that in mind, I want to ask a question, Dr. Kimbrough. Should we really rethink where we're sending money? Should we rethink that perhaps maybe we could grant tax incentives for individuals that want to pay for online learning tools that may not be at a university level?
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman Burleson. I would say, first off, what we see in our own data is that more and more workers are embracing the idea of investing in themselves and learning, whether it's in an online format or they're looking for opportunities to consume and information, educate themselves, and skill themselves in any form they can. I would actually say that I think it's beyond the scope of my expertise to say what Congress should determine it should fund, but we definitely would support the idea of broadening the pathways. You have a plurality of pathways for access and not creating barriers. As an economist, I would tell you it's incredibly inefficient to have barriers
Right.
to unnecessary barriers.
So, for example, are education savings accounts, are they eligible to spend money on some of these, trainings?
I do not know that. I would have to get back to you.
Okay. Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. Gosh, I'm sorry. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for this discussion. Thank you for your testimony, everyone. I hope this hearing will shed some light on how we can incorporate quality, opportunity, and transparency for workers and employers into workforce development. To listening to my former colleague, or my colleague, sorry, on the other side of the aisle who just spoke, reminds me of the importance of really cracking down on these for-profit institutions that promise skills and then don't deliver. So I frequently talk about the importance of having a path for everyone. As a member of this committee, as a member of my community, as a policymaker, I understand that not everyone's on the same path. And I do want to emphasize that the committee's focus on credentials and competencies and skills should not come at the expense of discussions about college affordability. That needs to be part of the conversation as well. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle with college degrees can attest to the value of their education, and our nation's students and workers thrive when they actually have a real choice. between getting an affordable, debt-free four-year degree or entering a workforce training program. This should be a choice, not a decision made because college is not affordable. So, Dr. Kimbrough, our economy is evolving rapidly. New jobs are becoming available daily for workers in existing and emerging industries, and we're in a pretty exciting time and an opportunity-rich moment for job seekers and employers. And I'm interested in learning more about how this changing job market will affect skills-based hiring. So do you anticipate that the credentials available to workers today will change as job opportunities change, and if so, how? And also, how can federal policies such as the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act be updated? We need to improve credential transparency, provide some sort of baseline quality metric for credentials. Transferability, for example, of credentials is important to keep up with the pace of technology, and also collecting data about the utility of micro-credentials.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. To the first part of your question, I would say, as we look over time, we just see how quickly roles are changing. There are roles now on our platform that did not exist a decade ago, and the skills that are required for these roles are also kind of sprouting up anew. So it really is a moment of incredible change, which makes skills all the more important to kind of match people, because there are employers who are creating roles where they're not quite even sure of what the skills are they require because things are changing so rapidly. I see some nodding heads from my fellow panelists. So I would say we absolutely need to focus on the idea that skills are evolving over time, and we need to provide people chances to update and grow those skills in a continuous fashion. We see on our own platform that we have some 40,000 skills, and people at any given time are updating those skills in real time. To answer your other question about, more from a policy perspective, I would say at LinkedIn, we support WIOA and feel that promoting a skills-first approach should be a central tenet of any reauthorization of WIOA. And I do think that including awareness, including encouragement of public and private sector employers to use skills-first approaches would be vastly appreciated.
I appreciate that. Thank you. A few years ago, a very large tech company in this country did a survey of the skills that they're looking for in employees. The technical skills were actually at the bottom of the list, and at the top of the list were things like communication, collaboration, empathy, the ability to work on a team. So I just want to emphasize that those soft skills are really critical as well. We can't lose sight of that. The Bipartisan National Apprenticeship Act is a blueprint for how employers can use skills-based assessment to determine the readiness of apprentices for jobs for which they're hired. And last year, I helped secure funding for a registered apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship program in Northwest Oregon called United We Heal Training Trust. And it provides workers with personal and professional development opportunities, allows employers to recruit and retain skilled talent, but also improves the quality of training for workers. So, Dr. DeBroy, how can registered apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs like United We Heal leverage skills-based hiring practices in recruiting and hiring workers, particularly workers from underserved communities?
Thank you so much for the question. Apprenticeships are a really important way that employers can actually implement skills-based hiring practices. I think what's really interesting to look at in the data is what this lever has been able to accomplish for a lot of employers who are deploying it. What we see is much more diverse pipelines of candidates entering these apprenticeship programs than we have traditionally found in those occupations. And so it's actually bearing out what we thought could happen with apprenticeships to actually diversify a lot of occupations that have not traditionally seen workers who are women, workers who are people of color in them at the same rates as other workers. Thank you.
I appreciate that. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bonucci. Thank you so much. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. First, I'd like to just agree with the ranking member. This is a very exciting moment, really, that we have such bipartisanship on this. And the fact that we're now talking to innovators in terms of how to really disrupt this whole process of getting our workforce going. Very timely. And I think the fact that the American way is all about not having caps. And we've talked about the glass ceiling cap. We've seen boardroom. Paper cap is the first time I've heard this one, but it's now time, decades later, to finally get to it, and I appreciate that in a big way. So I want to thank you guys again. Mr. Haley, I believe the skills-based hiring will disrupt traditional higher education, allow new learning providers to compete as alternative pathways to the same type of jobs. How do you think higher education should adapt to a more competitive landscape and greater focus on job-relevant skills?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Owens. Higher ed, colleges and universities all need to evolve their curriculum, all need to evolve their approach and incorporate practical-based training into the academic coursework. It's not just academic coursework, but it's going to be practical-based skills training as well. I referenced earlier our University Alliance program as one such example where we partner with partner institutions and literally hand our technology training and incorporate that into classes. So consumers who are going to colleges and universities and junior colleges are expecting that the product continue to evolve. I think that in concert, obviously, with a public-private, this will ensure that more university-based hires are going to be prepared with practical skills. Those would just be a few thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Kimbrough, I jotted something down you said earlier, I think kind of highlights what we're talking about. It said skills are everywhere and they all matter. And that is such a powerful statement. I'm glad literally we're finally acknowledging that across the board. To you, Dr. Kimbrough, I'm encouraged by what you said, shared with us about the rise of skill-based learning or hiring. Last December, Utah moved to drop the bachelor's degree requirements from 98% of the state government jobs. However, your testimony indicates that roughly 4 in 5 job postings still require degrees. What will it take for more companies to look beyond the college degree as the only way for workers to gain in-demand skills? And what motivated LinkedIn interest to shifting toward a skill-based approach?
Thank you so much for that question. So you're absolutely correct. There are right now about 1 in 5 jobs on our platform at LinkedIn that do not require a college degree. But it's an encouraging trend. There was a point just before the pandemic when it was less than 10% of the jobs did not require a college degree. So we see an encouraging trend, a positive momentum. We also see now, currently, that about 45% of hirers on our platform are using skills as a way to source and identify potential candidates for roles. So this is also up significantly from the prior year. So we see this very positive momentum of adoption, but I think it's going to take time. It's a major collective mind shift that we have to undergo and a behavioral change that we have to go through in order to actually see this take root fully and broadly across our economy. But I am absolutely convinced that it is something that will benefit workers and businesses and the broader economy. If I quickly answer your last question, what made LinkedIn do this? Well, LinkedIn has a vision of creating economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, and the emphasis being on every means that we want to be a platform for every member, regardless of skill.
Thank you. I'm running out of time. I guess I'll just say this. We're definitely seeing a paradigm shift, and I think it's exciting for us on this side, wanting to be innovative legislators, to talk to innovators to how to make sure this paradigm shift fits in a way that we can bring so many more millions of Americans into building their dreams. So thank you so much for that. And I'm going to, let me see if it's okay. I want to recognize 5 minutes, Mr. Stevens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to witnesses for this hearing on the competencies over degrees transitioning to a skills-based economy. We're all about skills in Michigan, and I certainly hear from businesses, small businesses on the regular who are trying to hire a diverse, inclusive, and skilled workforce about the dogfight for talent. And we are in a race given the incredible job growth that the Biden administration has overseen. And as we continue to achieve these record-setting recovery milestones, it's vital that we ensure such growth is equitable and includes a path to economic prosperity for as many hardworking Americans as possible. And this certainly can be achieved by passing Ranking Member Bobby Scott's National Apprenticeship Act of 2023, a bipartisan bill that invests more than $3.85 billion over 5 years to increase access to registered apprenticeships, youth apprenticeships, and pre-apprenticeships. We're excited about the apprenticeships, and the registered apprenticeship program is the best tool in our toolbox for skills development. It will get students away from this debt culture. Earn as you learn. It's very exciting stuff. Now, this word came up about taxonomy, okay? And I have a confession, because I work with the apprenticeship programs, but I also worked for Obama's National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, and we did this great thing in this lab I was in overseeing workforce development to do the taxonomy for digital manufacturing jobs. And I got Healy here, Mr. Healy, with SAP, all this incredible innovation going on and software and this and that. I don't know how long you've been with the company, sir, but you've probably seen them through a lot. The company has. I mean, how were you, when the digital revolution hit, how was SAP taking your existing workforce, getting them access to skills, and then how are you communicating these new jobs on these platforms that exist, and then with the community colleges and the schools and all this and that, so we can make sure we have these workers in IoT?
Thank you, Congresswoman Stevens. It is an incredibly pertinent point. SAP is going through one of the largest skills transformation in our 50-year existence.
And now you got AI.
Now you got AI. So you're absolutely right. To make the journey from on-prem software to cloud, the disruption that cloud has had on customers, the expectations for consumers. When you talk about generative AI as well, so we are embarking on a workforce transformation plan, not only across 107,000 colleagues, but within the United States. And it is back to skills.
And you got to look at these apprenticeships too. I mean, look, this is a topic I've engaged on for a long time, and no one's here to finger point. I mean, we have got to succeed because we've got the trained workforce of the future today, and it's continual learning. Now, we've got Dr. DeBroy here, and I want to bring you into this, because can you talk about this relationship between the registered apprenticeship program and skills-based?
Absolutely. Registered apprenticeships are a critical lever available to employers to actually deploy skills-based hiring and hire workers based on skill. I want to go back to a point you made earlier, because I think one of the moments that's in front of us is actually an opportunity to actually rethink how we collect data about our workforce in this country. We actually need a 21st century federal workforce data infrastructure to meet the needs of how fast skills are changing in the US labor market.
Cost. I mean, you're right though. I mean, we do. And it needs to evolve, and it's got to be alive and inputted into. And it's not just that you get your skill and you're done. That's the beauty of these apprenticeships. And that's the beauty of, we've got digital, but we've got analog too. We're not ever going to get rid of the hard skills. The painter's still going to paint. The road paver's still going to pave. I don't care what kind of robot you have, what kind of AI you have. Come to Michigan and see my building trades in action. It's real. All right, thank you. I'm over time. I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Mr. Desanier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Congresswoman, for your passion and background on this. She's being understated today. Dr. DeBroy, first of all, I want to acknowledge your resume. You went to the two best public universities in the country, the world. Go Bears, go Blue. I represent a part of the San Francisco Bay Area that has tech in the East Bay, but is also heavily industrialized. So we've had real challenges in the industrial sector with 5 refineries, chemical plants, manufacturing. although that's trying to rebound. So in California, I led a task force in the legislature, bipartisan, because we had eliminated a lot of our career tech infrastructure. And it was interesting going around the state and seeing how regionally we had gone away from that. We had heavily bought on the Bay Area that knowledge-based economy. Everybody was going to get a bachelor's degree, and the world had changed. So we have made really good progress on a bipartisan level in California about building back partnerships, career tech, and then with community college districts. The state California building and construction trades has changed dramatically. 80% of their members are minority and women. I was recently with them in a very disadvantaged community. You will remember this, Richmond, where we've got apprenticeship programs where kids from poverty are getting really good jobs in the industrial sector right out of college, $125,000, $150,000 a year. They are deliberately looking for kids who need opportunities. So I've spent a lot of time with the Labor Institute at Berkeley, been to Michigan to talk to your folks. This is a real partnership. The employers are the ones who are pushing the hardest because they need this skilled workforce, and they need it generationally at a time that the demographics are a challenge, but also the needs on energy transition. And since there aren't a lot of deep water ports in the West Coast, I mean, it's Puget Sound, Long Beach in LA, and San Francisco. Trying to do that is very important for the global and the national economy. And it's sort of a missing part of our discussion here about how do we rebuild these scales, knowing that we're going to have energy transition for 2 or 3 generations of the workforce, and we're going to have to retrain those folks. We have to train them in the first place, but we have to retrain them as well. You want to train those IBW and Boilermakers, but you got to get ready for they're going to be doing different work over this transition. Could you speak to that in your experience?
Absolutely. I'll actually reference economic history in responding to your question, because we are at a moment of transformation. And if we were to look to the past to kind of understand what might be coming in the future, I think we're sitting at a moment where there will be a proliferation of jobs in the next decade, 2 decades, that we do not yet know much about, right? These are going to be new to world occupations that we will have to figure out how to train a workforce for. I think what's exciting in looking at the data is that there are 70 million workers who are skilled through alternative routes, who are building skills in their jobs today, who could transfer a lot of those skills into the newer jobs that are coming online. I think how we now start to think about training programs to support them to make those transitions effectively and efficiently is a really important question for communities, because to your point, what is really interesting to study across the United States is regionally how many of these communities are performing for workers varies, and how we actually help communities recognize and understand where are there pockets of their workforce who are prepared to make these transitions immediately if they were given access to them is a really important question. And another really important question is how do we take the workforce we currently have and upskill them in the specific skills they need for these new jobs that are entering our regions?
So, and that's really important, and Dr. Kimber, if we have any time, so succinctly in a very big question, the cultural problem, and I love this hearing. There's a place for bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, but as people who work for a living have told me, both union and non-union, it's about RESPECT. How do you get kids to choose the right career, have their choices, and have that competency? So the cultural problem is a big thing. We want to value higher education, but it's not for everybody, and people who work with their hands deserve the same infrastructure and respect. Could you speak to that briefly?
Sure. I think it's actually why it's really important to understand the biases that we bring to our language. A lot of our language about the American workforce is deficit-based. We think it's important to bring a different narrative to workers who are gaining skills through many different pathways. It's why we've termed workers who have not gone to four-year degree programs STARS. They're workers who are skilled, but through alternative routes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A longer conversation, but I really appreciate this today.
Thank you. And I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Dr. Kimbrough, in your testimony, you alluded to how COVID-19 changed the workforce landscape. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, thank you so much, Congressman Good. COVID-19 changed the workforce landscape in a number of ways. There were some short-term impacts and long-term impacts, but really briefly, the short-term impacts were obviously a very quick rise in unemployment that over time came back down, and we saw many more Americans actually back at work, and we're now back at pre-pandemic levels. But the long-term impacts were about where we work and how we work and why we work, and we saw...
May I interrupt
Please.
just to clarify? I'm sorry. You said we're back at pre-pandemic levels.
In our data, and actually also in BLS data, we see that labor force participation rates amongst Americans, prime age Americans, age 25 to 54, is back at about pre-pandemic levels. We also see in our own data the rates at which people are being hired is about at pre-pandemic levels.
Do you see, or what impacts do you still see, though, with the public health emergency finally declared over? What challenges do you see or impacts do you see on the economy, though, beyond just the labor participation, which the reports I have seen is we have the lowest historic participation rate. We've got 2 or 3 million less Americans working than were working before the pandemic. But so perhaps you could address that, but then also what other impacts do you continue to see with the emergency declaration over?
Yes, thank you. So the labor force participation rate that I was referring to limits it to just the age of what we call prime age working Americans, so age 25 to 54, but there is a broader measure that includes people who are older than 54 or younger than 25, and that is probably what you have looked at. So in a sense, we're both correct. You asked the question about,
Other additional impacts?
Yes, absolutely. So other additional impacts that we're seeing is just that the pace of change is accelerating since COVID. People have transitioned to lots of online work. There's online marketing specialists. It's a role that sort of has always been around, but is now one of our top roles. It's on the platform. We saw a lot more trucking roles, for example, because there's so much more online shopping happening that people need these warehouses and storage centers and have the goods delivered to their home. So there's a lot of roles that are changing as a result of COVID. It's changing the job market in small and large ways.
Are you seeing an unwillingness to go back to in-person work after folks have gotten used to working remotely?
I would say that people really have enjoyed the flexibility they get from remote and flexible work options, but
including, if I may, federal employees who 80% are working only 1 day a week, by the way, in person.
We actually have quite extensive data on remote and hybrid, and what we see are that employers are encouraging people to come back to the office. More and more job postings are for hybrid or full-time on site, fewer are for remote. So the remote opportunities are declining, but applicants are still overwhelmingly preferring to apply for remote roles.
Can you share any thoughts you have on what the impact of vaccine mandate? I was talking to a group of high school students yesterday who showed up in the Capitol steps to meet with me. Talked to them about how we fired, I use the term we loosely, we fired their parents because they didn't get a vaccine. Can you talk about what you've seen the impact the vaccine mandate had on businesses?
I don't have a lot of data on that in our data set. We did actually try to look at that back a few years ago, and we just didn't have a lot of data. We were attempting to try to understand the degree to which, for example, job postings or employers were requiring mandates, but we didn't have enough information.
How about the impact on the relaxed work requirements, verification requirements, the expanded subsidies available, if you will, to able-bodied workers? How has the current welfare situation, federal subsistence situation, or even for that matter, state-supported subsistence impacted employment today?
What the economic data, and this is not LinkedIn data now, this would just be the economic data that I look at as an economist, seems to suggest is that there was a point at which Americans largely had a lot of excess savings, and that allowed them to consume more, shop more. It put pressure on the supply chains that were at the same time being constrained. I think most economists would say that excess savings is slowly being wound down.
Yeah, if I may, you've got the 20% loss in retirement accounts, the depleted savings because of folks not working, combined with the massive 40-year high inflation, and then the interest rates, which are particularly crushing Americans' ability to buy homes, grocery prices, utility prices, gas prices, housing prices, crushing the American people, all related to the policies of this administration. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Ms. Wilson.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having this hearing today. I'd like to try something new, so I'm going to ask all of the witnesses, if you will, I'm going to put this in the record, but I'm going to ask you if you will answer me in writing to these questions, but it will be on the record. What are your own organizations who are leaders and innovators in credentialing and work-based learning doing to address the gap that exists in soft skills acquisition, such as team building, communication, collaboration, which are also in high demand by our employers? That's number one. And how can we begin, even before college, to foster collaboration between formal curriculum tracks and competencies, credentialing, and organizations like yours? My own experience with my 5,000 role model boys has shown that we cannot wait until students reach higher education. And how would you propose collaborating with leaders in higher education, particularly at large urban public minority-serving institutions and HBCUs, so that they can benefit from your proposed models? And Dr. DuBrois, you highlighted that the current emphasis on formal education strips historically disadvantaged communities from job opportunities. 80% of Hispanic workers, 70% of blacks, and 75% of the rural workforce, as well as 70% of veterans. Could you share with us additional ways in which skill-based hiring could further improve the job prospects of historically disadvantaged groups?
Absolutely. There's quite a bit of racial segregation in our labor force today. In fact, if you look at the Black Star population, workers who are Black, have a high school diploma, do not have a four-year college degree, what you'll see is that they're actually concentrated in a really small subset of jobs. In fact, there's 25 jobs that account for 50% of Black stars in this country. What I think skills-based hiring allows employers to do is actually think about how workers in a number of occupations that are lower or middle wage are actually building skills that are transferable to higher wage occupations. Our study of 130 million transitions in the US labor market in the last 10 years actually suggests all of us make these transitions with our skills. Workers with a college degree, workers without a college degree. What we see, though, is that Black workers and Hispanic workers are not given access to skills-based transitions the same way as white workers. When they do get access to those jobs, they earn less than their white counterparts. We also see that for women, when they do achieve that transition, they are also earning less. So skills-based hiring is a really critical and important lever for employers to actually surface and find a lot of talent they seek today. And I think it's imperative on us to actually think about this method to diversify our workforce across the labor market. Thank you for the question.
Mr. Healy, in your testimony, you touted how the implementation of a blind screening resulted in the hiring of a more diverse class of developers, and your experience can help reduce potential biases across other industries. What are the other insights did you gain from the implementation of blind screening?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman Woman Wilson. I do agree that blind screening as a process, as a way to identify hidden talent, emerging talent, is very effective. And we ran such a process in our labs, SAP labs in California, and also used blind screening as a way not only to identify talents that are often overlooked, but also as a way to rotate talent within our organization as well, which became a part of our development program. And this was very effective. We found that in our incoming class, by using blind screening process, 50% of our talents were female, and the largest number of underrepresented minority talent as well, into technology jobs that are traditionally overlooked. So we are an advocate for that, and not only that for identifying talent, but also for rotating and growing talent within an organization.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank
For the
you.
record, the questions. Thank you. For
Okay,
the record.
okay, thank you. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Tucano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I welcome the opportunity this hearing presents to discuss competencies and skills-based hiring as a concept. We have seen how governments and businesses alike are looking at innovative ways to promote skills-based hiring at both the federal and local level. Often, businesses and employers look at a bachelor's degree as a guarantor of a certain level of literacy and numeracy. And I've heard the word proxy, that a bachelor's degree is a proxy for a certain level of a set of competencies. But the reality is that not every profession or every occupation requires a bachelor's degree, and we have to find other ways to, we have to look at ways to get past the idea of a bachelor's degree being a proxy in all cases. Now, to be clear, I'm not interested in bashing four-year degrees. You know, we still know that one of the surest ways to achieve economic mobility is by achieving a high-quality bachelor's degree. Not all bachelor's degrees are equal, but too often here in this committee room, in the name of trying to appear as if one is a populist or somehow closer with the ordinary person or whatever that might mean, that people end up bashing higher education. That shouldn't be our message either. But I was a former high school teacher, and I would still recommend to students that they have a four-year degree in their mind, but you don't have to achieve it all at once. It can be achieved in stackable credentials. So, you know, I was a community college trustee, as I said, at Riverside Community College. And one of the programs that I supported being implemented or being established was the physician assistance program at the community college level. We were the only community college west of the Mississippi River to actually have a physician's assistance program. And during the 90s and most of the aughts, in fact, all the way through the aughts, you could get a physician's assistance degree or a certificate or license with a 2-year community college program. There were some initial requirements to get into the program, which mainly was about 5 years of experience in a medical career prior to being in a program, you know, a Navy corpsman or being a medic or maybe an EMT. You could satisfy it a number of different ways. And interest in the program was substantial. It drew a number of students to the community college. And you could earn a very, very good wage, or good, not even a wage, a good salary after completing this program. To my surprise, when I came to Congress in 2013, I learned that the independent accrediting body phased out the community college program and said that you have to get a master's degree. This adds substantial more time in both getting your bachelor's degree and your master's degree. It left me furious as a community college trustee. I knew from what I knew, our students were scoring just as well on the board scores as a kind of an indication of competency. I'd like for anyone to, I only have about a minute left to respond to the story I just presented to you. It comes from my own experience. Does anyone have anything to add quickly before my time runs out?
I'll add a note on the importance of community colleges as a pathway for the majority of our workforce, because community colleges have proven to be engines of economic mobility for workers who are skilled through alternative routes. The majority of stars actually have some college credit, and almost 1 out of 5 stars has an associate's degree. And so this is actually a really critical pathway that we continue to invest in this country and ensure that workers are able to translate the learnings they get in community college to earnings in the labor market.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, You know, it's unfair because you're not unfair, but unfair that I asked that question to my panel because they don't, looking at their backgrounds, they really didn't have a background to sort of answer my question. But I'd love it if the committee could look into this issue of credential creep, but also how is it that we see these programs eliminated? That people could have achieved in 2 years. Is it really necessary to get a master's degree in order to be a physician's assistant? I mean, could that be done? I know people getting training in the military as corpsmen and as medics, who I wonder how much more education do they need to come out and be like a physician's assistant or a nursing or an advanced practice nurse.
I would love to. Again, I love the fact that we're having these kind of conversations about innovation and what really does count and what impacts as soon as possible in our society. So I would
love if we could work together, get a panel, no disrespect to this panel, but a panel that could engage this about these independent accrediting bodies. I don't want to muck that up, but I still think there's something wrong when you go from a 2-year community college program to a master's program. What's up with that?
Well, we'll have Dr. Fox look into this for sure. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Really do. Thank you. I'd like to yield 5 minutes to Ms. Chavez de Rima.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for holding this important meeting. There have been a lot of exchanges today, and our workforce consistently prioritizes skills over degrees. No other country can compete with us. And apprenticeships play a huge role in maintaining that economic edge. Oregon has created the right environment for maintaining an incredible apprenticeship system, one which other states, frankly, should copy. If you go to the Oregon Apprenticeship and Training Division's website, you'll find easily accessible programs equipping Oregonians to become bricklayers, educators, firefighters, aircraft mechanics, iron workers, and so many more jobs without our state couldn't function, quite frankly. Dr. DeBroy, in your written testimony, you discussed the need to have updated and accessible databases so that apprenticeship programs are meeting the labor's market needs. Can you tell me what are the barriers preventing these kinds of databases?
Thank you so much for the question, and it's such an important one. I want to grab my notes on this. There's the need that we have right now as a community in workforce to actually better understand the workers, their trajectories, their occupations, their skills, their employment opportunities. I think one of the most critical things we note in the federal data workforce, the federal data infrastructure right now is that there is a lag in when we get access to that data and how accurate it is in state and regional contexts. And I think investing in the opportunity to actually better understand the American workforce is going to better serve all actors within the workforce ecosystem.
So you're saying the data input is what's the barrier to, the lag of information is what is the barrier? That's the only barrier for the databases?
It is a significant barrier today.
Okay. And what are the targeted solutions we on the committee should focus on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think investments in data infrastructure are actually really critical. And I think through WIOA, we have an opportunity to also start to think about better investments in serving business services as well, to actually better serve small and medium-sized businesses as well as large enterprise and regions.
Thank you. Now for the programs themselves, in terms of how we prepare workers. In Oregon, workers overwhelmingly prefer registered apprenticeships because those programs have clear and uniform standards centered around what is best for the worker. Can you speak to why workers have such a strong preference for registered apprenticeship programs over industry-recognized programs?
Good question. I don't know as much about the variation in apprenticeships. What I will say from the data is that we've seen a proliferation of registered apprenticeships into new occupations in the U.S. labor market. So you named a number of occupations. We've also seen registered apprenticeships in healthcare, in technology, and advanced manufacturing that didn't exist 10 years ago. That's a really promising trend for the American workforce. I think beyond that, though, what we do see is a lot of innovation in employers actually deploying informal apprenticeship models to an additional 200 roles in the U.S. labor market. That's also really important because that's a kind of first step in figuring out how can we build those pathways for workers to actually enter a lot of newer occupations that they haven't historically had access to.
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you. I would add that it's important to remember that nobody, I hope, wants to get rid of industry-recognized programs. But I think we have to call it like it is. If you want the federal government to financially support your apprenticeship program, you've got to meet the standards which make registered apprenticeships so appealing to the workers. So really one last question that I have for you, Dr. DeBroy. Aside from the things you've already mentioned, what are the best ways Congress can make apprenticeships more successful for workers? And please feel free to take really what's left of 56 seconds to answer the question.
I do think it starts with a better data infrastructure for the American workforce. And then beyond that, I do think that there's apprenticeships still account for a really small portion of how workers get access to jobs. We need to scale that in a significant way, and there are ways that we can actually incentivize employers to move towards skills-based hiring practices. And apprenticeships are just one method, right? There are other methods like helping them see that internships are a pathway into work, that contract to hire opportunities are also another way to bring workers who haven't historically had access to a number of opportunities into their jobs as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeBroy. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to, we have 5 minutes, Ms. Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent North Carolina's 6th Congressional District, a place where we have a history of great manufacturing. Many of those jobs went overseas in the late 1990s, resulting in huge and devastating job loss. But thanks to very hard work and thanks to huge investments in the American worker and American businesses by the last Congress and the Biden administration, we are now enjoying the growth of advanced manufacturing once again in our district. And many of our businesses are now having trouble finding qualified workers to fill the open jobs. Simply put, we need more skilled workers. Dr. DeBroy, registered apprenticeship is viewed as one of the best tools in the toolbox for skilling up workers. And we know that 93% of people who complete a registered apprenticeship program are employed upon completion, earning an average wage starting above $77,000 annually. Is registered apprenticeship a model that can be used for a skills-based hiring approach? And if so, can you tell us how?
Yes, absolutely. Apprenticeships are a critical lever available to employers. One thing I will note, though, is that 70% of apprenticeships offer entry into jobs that make up just 8% of the labor force today. There's something now about thinking about this moment and expanding the number of pathways that apprenticeships can offer opportunities into.
Wonderful. And you mentioned in your testimony that the adoption of skills-based hiring that can expand employers' pool of applicants, improve candidate assessments, which in turn can lead to increased quality of new hires, as well as improvements in productivity, employee engagement, and retention. Can you talk a little bit more about I know you talked in your testimony, but if you can elaborate a little bit more on the what skills-based hiring can do for employers, and perhaps talk about hurdles that employers may face in using a skill-based hiring approach.
Thank you so much for the question. You're absolutely right. The return on investment in skills-based hiring certainly shows up in the hiring process, but it extends beyond that for employers. With larger and more diverse pools of applicants and more effective candidate assessments, employers can actually expect to see an increase in the quality of new hires with skills-based hiring. They can expect to see improvements in productivity, in employee engagement, as well as retention. That's what early data is actually showing about the value of skills-based hiring for employers.
And you noted in your opening statement that workers skilled through alternative routes, your STARS program, are willing and able to take many of the quality, high-paying jobs that remain unfilled across many industries. What steps can Congress take to incentivize employers to adopt these practices?
I think that there are a number of steps that the federal government can make. I think the first one is actually a really critical one, which is that the public sector is one of the largest employers in all regions of the country. Deploying these methods themselves as an employer is a first critical step. I think beyond that, the moment in front of us to actually make investments in WIOA and amplify them is a really critical investment that we can make to actually ensure that STARS are getting access to training and services they need to be placed into a lot of the higher wage occupations that are available in their region's labor market.
And I asked, but I don't know if you answered, are there hurdles that employers face in using a skill-based hiring approach? Are there skills that aren't easily tested that can actually affect whether an employee can succeed in a particular job?
Sorry, I missed that one.
That's okay.
It's a really important question because skills-based hiring is actually a quite different method to be deploying to surface talent than what employers have historically used, which is more of a pedigree-based approach. In deploying this method, there are genuine shifts that need to occur within an organization. It actually starts with a mindset shift. What we see is that the majority of managers in this country have a bachelor's degree. Managers with a degree are less likely to consider a worker without a degree for a similar job, and they're also less likely to make investments in workers without a degree within their own workforce. Combating that is the first step, right? Is how can we, in some respects, help employers understand that STARS are a vast, overlooked, skilled, and diverse part of our labor market who should be valued for many skills they are bringing to the job.
Great. Thank you so much. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just beg for your patience for a few minutes. I'd like to describe my district to you and then maybe ask for your advice and what we can do. We are blessed in New York's 22nd District with an abundance of resources. We have 3 excellent private colleges. In fact, three of the best in the country: Syracuse University, Colgate University, and Hamilton College. And we also have excellent community colleges, and I mean truly excellent. Mohawk Valley Community College, as well as the Onondaga County Community College. And we are also blessed with a historic opportunity of Micron Technology and making a historically large investment in manufacturing in this nation, and quite fortunately in our district as well. But that sets up a competition for available workers that are in our district. And I hear this from other manufacturers and companies that are already there, that there is this dynamic of competition, and there's also this dynamic of mismatch of skills, many of which you've addressed today in your questions and your testimony. When I hear about apprenticeships, skills-based training, certificate-based training, I would say all the above are relevant to what we're doing, and I see a lot of different models. For example, Onondaga Community College is moving towards a certificate-based learning program specifically to meet the most immediate needs in healthcare, technology, manufacturing, and other areas where we happen to be growing. It's actually very exciting. Even the trade unions actually are doing an excellent job of developing workers for construction. So you see we have all of the blessings and all of the challenges. We simply don't have enough workers. Could any of you address anything related to partnerships among all these different organizations, whether it's private or public, and how we can get new workers into the workforce? We're truly handicapped that we can't afford to leave anybody behind in my district. Quite literally, we need everyone to work. And yet I also know from my own experience doing jobs training for homeless men that there is a significant gap to get on that first ladder of the workforce. I really do open it up in a sincere way. Is there any advice or counsel you would have that help make me effective marshaling these resources to help people get on the workforce ladder because we need them? Please.
I think I can start.
Thanks for being brave, going first.
Thank you for the question and opening up to everybody. At SHRM, we've started a HR apprentice program. And so we've talked a fair bit about apprenticeship programs here, but they're typically more on the blue-collar side of thing. And at SHRM, we decided it would be a good idea to open that up past blue-collar and into what has traditionally been more of a white-collar job of human resources. And the really good thing about the apprenticeship programs is the on-the-job learning, but also you're getting paid while you do this. And I think there's more opportunities for this type of training beyond traditional blue-collar jobs.
May I ask what prerequisites you're looking for people to get on that kind of program?
Well, mainly it's the interest in it. And
Is it high school education? Is it any college? Is it,
I don't remember offhand. It's certainly not the bachelor's degree.
Okay.
But I don't remember if it's associated.
Can I open it up to anybody else?
I agree you've described a very robust workforce ecosystem. If I were to name from our research what we've learned is one of the most critical parts of ensuring that connection happens between and across a workforce ecosystem, it's getting the demand signal right. It's ensuring that workers know what jobs are in demand, what skills are required of those jobs, and they need that data in a timely way. To get that right for us now in this next phase, we actually need to update our data infrastructure for this century.
A lot of times I come across, and I know I'm out of time, I come across manufacturers that are offering amazing packages for people, education, all kinds of things, and they find no takers. Any last thoughts in our remaining seconds? Thank you. Thanks for your time. I yield back, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize for the last 5 minutes, Ms. Pullman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. This is an incredibly awesome and exciting conversation. I am so happy that we are having it. I want to start by giving a huge shout out to Chairwoman Virginia Fox. She was just sitting there, but I wanted to acknowledge her publicly and the Republican Party for putting this hearing together. If someone can get Chairwoman Fox back in here, I want her to hear me say, this is great, and I want to give her a huge shout out. So I'm thinking about so many things, right? Obviously, I support higher education, but it's not a pathway for everyone. And for so long, for decades, so many young people who have graduated from high school have been left out of higher earning jobs and careers because they didn't have access to higher education. So this is the exact conversation we need to have, a conversation about multiple pathways to work, dignity, self-determination, self-respect, and a thriving economy that works for everyone and helps humanity. To me, this is about equity. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about equity. So I got a couple questions. One, what should high schools be doing? Because I also think that kids should be graduating high school ready to enter the workforce. What should high schools be doing? And then try to answer quickly, because I got one more question. I'm going to start with Dr. DeBroy, and then we'll go to Healy, and then boom, boom, boom. Quickly, and I got one more question, please. What should high schools be doing?
I think there's a basic set of skills that all students coming out of high school should be getting, that employers recognize and understand are valuable skills for all jobs in the labor market.
Awesome.
I would concur. I would say that high schools need to understand the requirements and the technical requirements for many roles, particularly for employers within their district, and teach those skill sets.
Okay, awesome.
Expose them to the range of great jobs that are out there, not just college pathway jobs, but all the other trades jobs that are out there.
Yep.
I think they should also focus beyond technical skills on what we would refer to as behavioral competencies. So teamwork and communication. There are these what are sometimes called soft skills, but these skills that are very common across all sorts of jobs that are often, I think, underdeveloped in high school.
Yeah. In many ways, our K-12 system is like the same that it's been for like 100 years, and that needs to evolve in many ways, and that's why I ask about high schools, but my background is education. I know it needs to happen at the K-12 level as well. I think this is a moonshot moment for our humanity and economy, and we need to rethink, reimagine, redesign, and restructure the economy a way that aligns to everything we're talking about here today. I think part of that is going to require us investing in getting employers, educators, higher ed, and everyone who cares about humanity and the economy in a room to consistently work together to reimagine and redevelop the economy in a way that deals with the issue of equity, because we measure the strength of our economy right now through GDP. We talk about how powerful and great we are, but we haven't even scratched the surface of our capacity because we continue to leave tens of millions of people behind because of persistent inequality within our economic system. You are all nodding, so I guess you agree with that. Can you just comment on that, Healy, quickly, and then down the line, please?
SAP believes unequivocally that people's sustainability, so you've just been touching on people's sustainability as a business imperative, and we support human potential to create more sustainable futures. So we define, by the way, we have a definition of people's sustainability, and it means treating people across organizations, supply chains, and communities ethically and fairly. We can do that through, obviously, the identification of skills and matching skills to open needs, open roles.
Yep, thank you.
I concur that this is a moonshot moment, and there are 70 million workers, 30 million of which who have skills to move into significantly higher wage work today if they were given access and opportunity to do so. It is time that we leverage them and give them that opportunity.
That's right.
At SHRM, we strongly support skilled hiring no matter where the skills come from. So if it comes from education, great. If they get good business relevant skills from other places, also great.
There's a meaningful number of Americans who are only marginally attached to the economy. There's at least 5 million Americans out there who want a job and aren't even looking. So there's a huge amount of untapped talent still beyond the stars.
There are multiple intelligences. Skills are always evolving. This is about lifelong learning and upskilling consistently. This is very exciting. Thank you all so much. And I'm sorry, Virginia Fox did not come back. Sorry, Chair Fox. Another shout out to you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Appreciate it. And I'd like to, and would you, if you would mind, just staying around for a minute as I close out too, Mr. Bowman. Just hold tight. I'd like to recognize for her closing statement, Ms. Hayes.
I just want to thank the witnesses for your time here today. This was a very important hearing, and as you hear, there is bipartisan support for this initiative because it really is just that basic. We have to prepare our workforce for the future of the next generation of jobs, and there are so many young people changing careers, people who have life experiences that can be transferred into the workplace. College is not for everyone for a variety of different reasons, whether it be the costs, the location, transportation, childcare. There are lots of different barriers, but it doesn't mean that people can't still find success. I think that it is very important that we look to ways that we can get more people into the workforce, not less. The Biden administration has talked a lot about Made in America, bringing jobs back home, getting people back to work, and this is one of those initiatives and ways that we can do that. I would just finally like to close by saying we have to, I guess, I echo the comments of Ranking Member Scott when he emphasized that it is past time that this committee passes a fully funded reauthorization of WIOA that relies on evidence-based practices and better engages employers in our workforce development system. I think we're all asking for the same thing. We just have to work really hard to make sure that we are reaching the people who are never touched by these programs, digging deep into the most vulnerable and marginalized communities, making sure that employers are working cooperatively with the recommendations, the system, if they're going to access any type of federal funding. And the way we get to that, I think, can be achieved through hearings just like this. So again, I thank you for your time and your participation, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you so much. I guess a couple of things. I too wish Dr. Fox was here, but I wanted to share Mr. Bowman's enthusiasm and excitement about where we are at this point. Dr. Dupre, you mentioned, I was going to say inflection point. You said it best, moonshot moment. Was that very good? All right. Another reason for you to stay around. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. No, that's exactly, when you think about where we are today, we have the industries, we have the legislation, and we have American parents all focused on one thing, not only preparing our kids, but listening to them and then giving them the options to really go out and do what we have to do. This, I think, you're talking about national security. you cannot say something more important than, first of all, educating our children and giving them a chance to go out and build the American dream. And that's where we are right now. So there was something Thomas Jefferson said, ignorant and free can never be. Our freedom comes from ability to dream big, go out there and pursue what we want to do in life, feel that this means something, and then giving back. So I'm going to say the biggest ask we have as a committee, we're at a point now where we truly do need to hear from innovators. We want to be innovative in terms of how we legislate, and that's why we had the questions we had today. We want to think outside the box. How can we get all these millions of young people and old to be in a position where they can pursue what they really believe is important and really fall in love again with the opportunities we have in this country? So my big ask would be, please be proactive. Please let us know what it is that we can do to kind of give you a runway so we can go out and actually build something and legislate something that gives you the freedom to make that happen. So I want to thank you again. This has been a remarkable hearing. And again, we all share the same concepts. We just want to make sure we make sure our kids are in good shape. So thank you for that. And I would like to, again, thank the witness for taking the time to testify before the committee today. Without objections, there being no further business, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you so much.